right, chat. I need to fix a bunch of stuff. I will be back in like 2 minutes. Or I guess I can do it here. I just have a bunch of stuff I need to pull up. So give me a second, chat. No, I'm good. You can drop. Thank you. Okay, chat. I had a bunch of like research open and things like that, but I had to restart my computer. So I have to pull up a bunch of research papers so that I'm not fumbling around when we're... Oh, Jesus. Okay, I got to open up like 15 research papers. I usually spend like 30 minutes opening up all of the research, so I got to dig through and find it all again, which is fine. It's okay, chat. So let's see if this actually will work. Nope, not going to work. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Which ones was I looking at? We were looking at depression. Give me a second, chat. We're going to get started in just a hot second, okay? Oh, Jesus. I got to find the right paper. Okay. Not this one. Not this one. Not this one. Not this one. Oh, nope. That's one of them. Okay, this one. This one. This one. This one. Okay. All right, chat. Found some of them. Yes. Okay, so we've got depressive realism. Okay, I can't find one of them, but that's okay. We don't need all of them. There's plenty of studies here. Okay, let's do this. Not anxiety. Anxiety, depression. Okay. Give me a second, chat. Here we go. Randy Auerbach. Okay. And then oh no, I missed. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk about some cool stuff today. All right. Then we have one last one, document 1. And then here we go. Okay. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. I think we're good. I'm forgetting 1 or 2 papers, which I can't remember now. But that's okay. We'll just have a little bit less research, or it'll come to me. All right. Okay, chat. So, welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational or entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a medical concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. So today we're going to be doing some fun stuff. Actually, I got to set up a couple other things. Now I'm frazzled. So the first thing that we're going to do is celebrate that this is Dr. K streaming. And sometimes when Dr. K streams, we forget to do things, okay? Or like things just get scuffed. So this is like where, unfortunately, I'm relying on my racial bonus of tech support to get through these stream things. And we have an awesome staff, but despite the fact that they are awesome, they cannot overcome my general incompetence with this stream stuff. You'd think that if it worked, but that's not how it is in life, okay? And I'm now sweaty, so I'm going to go turn on some air conditioning, I think. And then I'm going to light some incense, and then I'm going to be right back, and we're going to talk about shit life syndrome, and it's going to be great because we're going to learn so much about some of the fundamentals of how this stuff works, okay? So hang tight for a second, chat. Now we are good to go. Okay? So, y'all ready to get started? Should we do some chatting about these things? One last thing I got to do real quick. I got to just see if we have any announcements. Okay. So, oh yeah. So I've been so distracted that I forgot to say that today is the day that we are launching our trauma guide. So I made a guide to trauma. And we tried to synthesize research from over 400 studies. It's something that we put a lot of love into. The guide to trauma is, so it's not a clinical treatment or a substitute for clinical treatment, but like we do with our other guides, right? So like the guide to ADHD and doing stuff, what we did in our trauma guide is, it's really a guide about how you get shaped. So when human beings interact in the world, my audio is too low. Can you pull mic close? This is about as close as it gets. It's jacked up all the way. Yeah, this is, oh yeah, this is extra low. I don't know what's going on. Testing 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Is this better? Better, worse, better, worse, better, worse. Better, worse, better, worse, better. It's about the same. Okay, that's weird. I don't know what to do about my audio. I see that it is quite quiet. Okay. It's kind of going to be the best it's going to get right now. Okay. So I'll keep it like super close to my face. We can go like this. Okay. Anyway, so we have a trauma guide that came out today. So this is not, it's really not a substitute for clinical treatment, but it is something that I built basically like when I had patients who had diagnoses like PTSD or CPTSD, and I was thinking about how to help them. What I discovered is that there's a lot of stuff that they can do, which is a little bit more on the psychoeducation side. So things like rewiring their nervous system and stuff like that. Those are the kinds of things that we tried to invest in sort of teaching y'all in the trauma guide. So it's a lot about sort of the theory of trauma, how trauma shapes us, and how to potentially rewire or better understand what trauma does to you. Super proud of it. We really built it with a lot of love, and we hope it'll help. I guess just turn up your volume and hope that there are no ads, because that will be rip your ears. But let's dive in. Okay, so a couple years ago, and by the way, we're going to be showing some stuff from the trauma guide like a little bit later, but since we're running late, I want to just dive into the stuff that we're supposed to cover today, okay? Is that okay, chat? Okay. Hold on. I'm missing one other. Oh boy. Okay. Hold on, chat. Okay. Copy link address. Man, losing all your tabs, chat. Life is hard sometimes. Okay, let's dive in. So, shit life syndrome. What do we know about it? I remember seeing this mentioned in an HG video a while ago, but I don't remember which one it was. I'm sure it's not an empirical medical phenomenon or anything, but whatever it resembles, I'm curious about the outcomes of the people who suffer from it. Is there such a thing in living in a situation that is systemically unhealthy to the point that there isn't any viable path to good mental health? Can people overcome shit life syndrome? So, some time ago, I talked about this term shit life syndrome. And before we kind of go into more detail, I'm going to just sort of explain where this term comes from. So when I was a second year resident maybe intern at Massachusetts General Hospital, I was working with a very, very talented nurse practitioner. And, she would see patients and then would kind of report, wow, that is really quiet. I don't know what to do about that, chat. That's so weird. Okay. Okay. So when I was working with this nurse practitioner, she was really awesome, and she would go see patients, and then I would ask her, what's the diagnosis of the patient, and then sometimes she would say that this patient has shit life syndrome, and so I was really intrigued by the term, and I would ask her, like, what does that mean? And she would basically say, like, okay, so you have these people who come into the emergency room, and if you look at what their diagnosis is, they have like 15. They have ADHD, PTSD, oppositional defiant disorder. These were oftentimes like children or adolescents, major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and polysubstance use. So they have all of these different diagnoses. And the thing about these diagnostic constructs is that the idea that someone has 6 different independent brain pathologies or mental health pathologies that are all concurrent is exceedingly rare. And so we use this term shit life syndrome to basically describe this group of people whose lives are so bad that as they are trying to survive in life, they run into mental health challenges. They go somewhere, they get diagnosed with a particular thing, and they just rack up these diagnoses. So this is where the term shit life syndrome comes from. So today we're going to be talking about what it is and whether it can be overcome. Okay, so now we're going to look at another post. So how to tell the difference between mental disorders and shit life syndrome. I've been trying to answer this question for a while. How do I know what's the cause and what's the effect when it comes to mental state? Am I depressed and suicidal because of how my life turned out? Or am I perceiving life to be more shitty than it is because of underlying mental disorders? I've never been to a psychiatrist, so I've never been diagnosed, but I've been dealing with OCD since I was 6. I experience a lot of MDD, anxiety, social phobia, and ADHD symptoms. I've also been suicidal for more than 6 years. The thing is, most of those things appear so small when put next to 7 figures in the bank account. Most of my issues would immediately disappear. Only then would I be able to do the things because I can, do things because I can, not because I have to. I experience what I'd call a money-induced paralysis. It's very unlikely that I'll ever be financially independent, and it's unlikely I'll ever find something interesting enough I deem worth pursuing for hours on end. Those realizations alone are enough to make me apathetic, procrastinate on all matters, and basically give up on life and wait for the right opportunity to kill myself. I'd rather be dead than live a life I don't consider to be worth the effort. I've been thinking about seeing a psychiatrist for the past few months, but I have my doubts. I procrastinate on making an appointment because it feels like my problems stem from money, and it's not like they'll make me rich over there. That is enough justification for me not to go. I also can't get myself to schedule other appointments, blood tests, physio, dentist, because if my life will remain the same despite improving in some areas, then why bother? Oh, I don't know what that is. I'll kill myself anyway without some magical epiphany occurring in my mind. I suspect there could be something wrong with my brain because plenty of other people have lives objectively worse than me, yet they see survival as something of value in and of itself. That could be the result of them being ignorant, me being ungrateful, or my brain being disabled. So how do I know whether my shitty mental state is caused by my views on life, philosophy, bad attitude, being lazy, ungrateful, spoiled, etc., or by some condition beyond my reach? Or perhaps that's how it's supposed to be because my conclusions are logical and I just can't ignore them. So this is a very, very, very common problem. So some of us look at our lives and we say that things are objectively bad. And we look at our lives and we think, okay, so like modifying my internal instrument is useless if my circumstances are bad, right? So we can say like, okay, I'm short, I'm bald, my chances of ending up with someone seem very, 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 very low. So what's the point in trying? Like my life is objectively bad. And what basically, and so then like the question is like, okay, is this mental illness, like, is this an appropriate adaptation to negative circumstances? Or is this a mental illness that is misinterpreting what my chances are? How do I know which one it is? So today we're going to talk about how to address this problem. It's a fascinating problem. We're going to dig into a lot of research. The short answer is that it is a false dichotomy. And that even if your circumstances are bad, I believe that you can do drastic things to drastically improve your circumstances. So I believe shit life syndrome can largely be overcome. And even though that sounds very, very, if you're rebelling against that, that is part of shit life syndrome, which we'll kind of get to, right? So the first thing that I want y'all to notice is that if I say that this is possible, your mind will automatically have a reaction. And so the problem with shit life syndrome is that you have objective problems and you have internal problems. And the problem is that your objective problems you may not be able to fix, but even when you're subjectively hampering yourself, it is very difficult to fix your situation. So like, I'll give you all a simple example. So what is the difference between a setback and a failure? So in both cases, the objective reality can be the same. I tried something and I failed. The difference between a setback and a failure is whether I decide to try again. And if I try again and then I succeed, then the failure becomes a setback. And if I decide to stop at that point, the failure becomes a failure. So this is what's really crazy, and this is what we're going to dig into today, is that even if your life is bad, I'm not saying it's objectively bad, that there are certain things that you can do that will change the way that you approach life, which will then hopefully lead to positive outcomes. And I'm going to try to base this in as much like evidence as I can. I mean, that's not even true, but I'm going to cite evidence to sort of support this viewpoint. But basically, don't give up, chat. Now, the first thing that I want to do is let's just look at this language, okay? So, hold on a second. So, it is very unlikely that I'll ever be financially independent, and it's unlikely I'll ever find something interesting enough I deem worth pursuing. Those realizations alone are enough to make me apathetic, procrastinate on all matters, and basically give up on life. Now, I want y'all to stop and think about this for a second. Which of these two things do you think is responsible for this person's situation? Is it the fact that they believe that they'll be, let's say they're financially dependent and they're not passionate at anything? These are two objective facts. But the realizations alone are enough to make me apathetic, right? So this is where we have to be very, very, very careful. Because now what we see is that there is a objective circumstance on the outside, which results in a realization, and then that realization creates apathy, procrastination, and people giving up. And then what is responsible for you staying stuck? It is actually a combination of all of these things. It is a false dichotomy. So let's talk a little bit about shit life syndrome. So this is a psychodynamic article that someone kind of talks about shit life syndrome. So this is like, so this is what's really interesting is shit life syndrome is something that clinicians came up with. So let's read this case, okay? In the letter from the doctor, we learned that she had experienced a number of problems since early childhood. She had initially been raised in foster care, bad thing number 1, abused by a neighbor, bad thing number 2, left home at only 17, bad thing number 3, subsequently engaged in a series of emotionally and sexually abusive relationships with men, bad thing number 4. The father of her baby had recently been jailed for drug-related crime, bad thing number 5, and now at 24, she was raising a 2-year-old by herself. She was currently unemployed, struggling to manage government benefits, and appeared to have no family and few networks available. This is shit life syndrome. This person, it appears, does not have a chance. Bad thing after bad thing after bad thing. And there is a lot of data that supports that this is what happens, right? So we have a lot of studies on something called adverse childhood experiences, which is that if you have a bad upbringing, what tends to happen is that this correlates with worse mental health outcomes, worse life outcomes. This is very common. So let's talk a little bit about so I've since become very curious about this expression, shit life syndrome, not the least because of the implicit consensus by everyone in the meeting, including myself, as to what it meant. Everyone knows what it means, even though it's never been defined. The phrase seemed to denote a level of long-standing poverty, family breakdown, lack of stability, unemployment, and potential risk factors common to many of the predominantly young, working-class patients referred to the service. Okay? So for shit, of course, is something that we generally prefer not to think about, something we continually reject, get rid of, or hide. At the same time, it is something that we cannot completely repudiate. It is part of us, something we need, something that is ineluctably, I don't even know what that means, part of our status as human beings, as subjects. Those suffering from shit life syndrome then would seem to be those individuals whose problems are deemed to be so terrible, so untouchable, that they quite literally cannot be thought about and cannot be handled by the service. Okay? So let's understand where this term comes from. Shit life syndrome is a term that came up, that was stumbled upon by mental health professionals when they were tasked with helping people that seemed unhelpable. No amount of you coming to my office 1 hour a week for therapy is going to fix your history of abuse, your problems with employment, your history of sexual partners that have been abusive to you, your foster care background, your history of trauma, the ADHD, the OCD. There's no amount of therapy that will fix this objectively bad thing. And so we call this shit life syndrome, right? Because it's like, it's too much to handle. Even in the term, we don't really define it. We say that this is unsolvable. This is coming from clinicians, by the way. Okay? So, the question is, can we do something about it? And my belief is yes. So I say this as a clinician who has both failed to do something about it in a lot of the people that I've worked with, and as someone who has succeeded in doing something about it with a lot of the people that I've worked with. So I'm not saying that this answer is 100% is going to transform your life or whatever, because there's a lot of data that shows that your mental health is correlated with some of your circumstances. So let's understand this, right? So if we're looking at, let's just go to another, I remember which paper I was missing. Haha, I remember now because I want to talk about it. Hold on. Here it is, okay? So let's take a look at another paper. So deaths of despair, adults at high risk for death by suicide, poisoning, or chronic liver disease in the United States. So there is this construct that we have discovered in mental health called deaths of despair. I think this was originally discovered actually in the UK. So there were these old fishing villages that used to have very robust economies. And then once like the fishing industry left, the town became like a ghost town. There's no economy. People started drinking. People started committing suicide. And as we tunnel down into why are people killing themselves, what we discovered is that there's a lot of systemic factors that are causing this, right? So this is like, how do we know it's systemic? Because if it was individual, it would be variable within a population. But what we find is everyone in this town is an alcoholic and is suicidal. Not everyone, but the rates are way higher. And then in this neighboring town where things are socioeconomically better, like the climate is the same, the water is the same, but like the economic situation is different, we see way less suicide and alcoholic liver disease, among other things. So we see substance use, suicidality, depression. There's a big difference. So systemic problems have systemic solutions. I 100% believe this. This is part of the reason we started Healthy Gamer in the first place. So I want y'all to really think about this. Why did we start this? Because I saw a systemic problem that I realized no amount of like talking to people in my office is going to fix. What I saw in my office was an increasing number of people who did not know how to live life. They didn't know how they work. And since you don't know how you work, you can't figure out how to live life. So today what we're going to talk about is teach y'all the fundamentals of like, is this mental illness or is my life bad? Because the answer is neither and both. So this is what I want y'all to understand. You are a living organism. And the whole point of a living organism is that it interacts and is shaped by its environment. We are in a homeostatic relationship with our environment. We adapt to our environment. We shape our environment. So it goes both ways. Okay, so I'll give you all a simple example. So if it's hot outside, I will start to sweat. If it is cold outside, that's called diaphoresis. If it's cold outside, I will have piloerection, which means I will have goosebumps and my hair will stand on end. My physical body adapts to the circumstances around me in order to try to succeed in this scenario. So when we say that people with shit life syndrome, is this shit life syndrome, is this mental illness? The answer is both. Mental illness is oftentimes the consequence or the adaptation to negative circumstances. Okay? So I'll give you all a simple example. We consider PTSD a mental illness. And why is it a mental illness? Because it does not allow human beings to live their life normally. But what we also know about PTSD is that it is an adaptation. It is a mechanism of survival that the organism goes through. So as a simple example of this, if I've been traumatized in some way, my body is on high alert. My autonomic nervous system is wired in a high arousal state. My heart rate goes up, my blood pressure goes up. I start to think more catastrophically, which is not a bug, it's a feature, it's an adaptation. When the brain is faced with danger, we need to focus on the worst case scenarios, not the middle of the road scenario, right? That's a survival adaptation. The problem is that these adaptations, which allow us to survive, prevent us from thriving because these two goals are fundamentally different. So the problem in shit life syndrome is that the way that you wire is not to succeed. It is to survive. Now, I want y'all to think about the implications of that. Really think about that, okay? So think about, for example, like I'll give y'all just a couple of examples. So one thing that we develop is something like low self-esteem. Or, we talk about this in the trauma guide, one of the things that we see in shit life syndrome is the inability to consider the future. So if we look at this post and you read it, this person is not future-oriented. They are not planning for the future. They are not doing steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They are simply existing and responding to the environment. They are apathetic. They procrastinate, and they're not exerting an influence to change their situation. Now, people can call this laziness, but it's not laziness. It's an adaptation. So let's understand this. I'll give you all just one example. So when someone grows up in a, what's the right word? A deficient environment, an environment that does not have stimulation. What happens is if we grow up in an environment where we are not allowed to plan for the future, if we grow up in an environment where our circumstances control our future, our brain loses sight of the ability to plan for the future. Okay, so I'll give you all a simple example. Let's say I'm a kid and I want to have a birthday party because all my friends have a birthday party. So I go to my mom and my dad and I say, hey, Mom and Dad, can I have a birthday party this weekend with my friends? And your mom and dad say, sure. Then what happens is if you think about being a 7-year-old, you can't plan your own birthday party. You don't know how to order cake. You don't know how to invite friends. You don't know how to do any of that. So it is your parents' responsibility to do all of those things. But if you have a single parent household and your parent is working 3 jobs, if you have parents who struggle with substance use, if you have parents who don't know how to operationalize their own problems because they have a history of trauma, they don't know how to make your birthday party. And so what happens is you have, or in the worst case scenario, your parents say, yeah, we can have a birthday party. And then the day before the birthday party, one of your parents is drunk and angry, and they arbitrarily punish you for nothing that you did wrong. And they say, you don't get a birthday party because you're making too much noise. You don't understand how to be respectful. Unrespectful kids, disrespectful kids don't deserve birthday parties. Now, when you grow up in an environment like this, what is the cost of thinking about the future? Just pain. You told all your friends, hey, I'm going to have a birthday party. And what happens? Your birthday party gets canceled. Now you're ashamed. Now you feel disappointed. Now you feel like your expectations have been let down. So what we see on research from complex PTSD especially is that the capacity for your brain to think about the future requires that when you were a child and you think about the future, that is rewarded. But if thinking about the future leads to a punishment, leads to expectations that get dashed, lead to suffering, then your brain is like, this is a waste of time. Thinking about the future is only results in pain and nothing good ever comes of it. So we're going to stop thinking about the future. There's a lot of really interesting research on this on prisoners of war. So when you're a prisoner of war, thinking about the future is useless. You don't know if you're going to be in this prison for a year, 5 years, 10 years. There's no promotion. There's no leaving. It's just about survival. So when the human brain starts focusing on survival, it does not focus on thriving. These are two different adaptive strategies. I want y'all to think about this in terms of a video game. Right? So like the build that I have, like a tank build, is different from like a solo accomplishing build. Right? If you're playing something like BG3, you can do this lone wolf run, which is like, I'm going to do everything myself. And you build the character in a very specific way. This leads to thriving. But if all you're doing in life is tanking damage, you are not going to lean into thriving. That's not what you've been programmed for. You've been programmed for survival. And if you've been programmed for survival, it becomes very hard to create the life that you want to, because that's not how your brain works. Okay? So, then the problem is that these adaptations cause future problems because you don't know how to craft a life that like is fulfilling, right? So this person may not even know, like they say, like pursuing a passion. I don't know how to pursue a passion. So I don't feel passionate about anything. So just as an example of that, if you have a history of trauma, your brain goes through something called hemispheric lateralization, which is along the dissociation spectrum. So you unplug from your emotions. When you unplug from your emotions, your capacity to feel passion disappears because you're unplugged. Why are you unplugged? In order to survive from the negative emotions. So our brain is like, okay, I can get overwhelming shame. That's bad. So I'm going to unplug from emotion. We're going to Alt F4 emotion.exe. And when we Alt F4 emotion.exe, we lose access to passion as well. So the adaptations that we use to survive are the very things that prevent us from thriving. Now, here's the really tricky thing, is it turns out that these adaptations that you make will be deterministically bad for you in the future. Okay, so remember that the organism is in homeostasis with the environment. We're trying to survive. So we're forming certain kinds of adaptations. So if we look at some of these adaptations, what we find is that these adaptations will become problematic in the future. Okay? So I'll give you all a simple example of this. Okay? So the combined cognitive hypothesis in depression. So this is a paper that looks at cognitive biases. So what we know is that when people have a history of trauma and when they suffer from depression, which by the way can be an appropriate, like almost like an adaptation or maladaptation from your circumstances. So here's the chain of reasoning, okay? Adverse childhood experiences increase the risk of depression. So if you've had a shit life, you are more likely to have depression. Once you add depression into the mix, that creates prospective problems. This is not about the history. This is the way we have been wired, creates problems for the way that we're going to play the game of life. So there are multiple theories behind this, but they're basically all agree that there's some kind of bias in our mind. So we have memory biases. This is wild. Okay. Oh, did I find? Yes. This is a cool paper. Oh, no. Hold on. Nope. Let me see if I can find it. I want to find this one. Yes. Here we go. Okay. So this is like really weird. Okay. So what we know is that there are memory biases in depression. So a memory bias for negative material found that individuals diagnosed with depression recalled more generic or overgeneral memories than did their non-depressed counterparts, okay? So this is kind of weird, but what this means is that people with depression do not remember like positive details. Like their memory just is like vague in terms of positive stuff. So importantly, the tendency to elaborate negative emotional information, memory bias for this information, and recall of overgeneral memories may be associated with other cognitive aspects of depression. So these are the three biases, right? So what starts to happen once we enter this depressed state, which is a consequence of our adverse childhood experiences, is that this is not the negative experience. Okay, let me take a step back. I'm going to actually just start this section over. So realizing I'm jumping around too much. Okay, so let's take a step back, okay? Dr. K is going to rewind. So is this mental illness or is this shit life syndrome? Which one is it? Is it my bad circumstances or is it something wrong in my brain? The answer is both. So our current understanding of mental illness is based on, I think this is the prevailing theory, it's the one that I prescribe to, something called the stress diathesis model. So the stress diathesis model means that in order to be ill, illness is a consequence of two things: a genetic predisposition plus an environmental exposure. So there is something that is part of you plus some environmental shaping results in something called a mental illness. And this is really consistent with our studies of things like depression and adverse childhood experiences, okay? So if I have a crappy life, my mind starts to get depressed. Now the problem is that the depression is a consequence of my past, but it very actively and negatively shapes my future. And this is where things like cognitive bias come in. So we know that once you have some negative view of yourself, it changes the way you perceive the world. You pay attention to more negative stimuli. So if we look at this paper, what we basically find is that if you're looking at a neutral face, you will pick up negativity even within neutrality. So what we know about cognitive bias and depression is, let's say that I have multiple interactions throughout the day. 25% of my interactions are positive, 25% of my interactions are negative, and 50% of my interactions are neutral. Once I have a cognitive bias from depression, this is created by the depression now, okay? What this means is that I tend to overgeneralize the positive parts of my memory. So the positive parts of my memory become vague and fuzzy. They don't really sink in. The negative parts of my memory get turned into negative. The negative parts of my memory are negative, and then the neutral parts become negative. So now in a life that is 25% good, 25% bad, and 50% in the middle, my brain interprets this is 75% bad and 25% neutral. I don't really remember the positive stuff. Now, this creates a prospective impact on my life. So it isn't just that I have shit life syndrome. That's absolutely bad, and that results in depression. Can't really control that. But then the depression determines my future. And this is where, I know it sounds crazy, but like the reason that I think shit life syndrome can get better is because there are 3 steps to this. There is circumstances which are outside of control, create an adaptation. This adaptation creates your destiny. Now, this you can't control, but this you can fix. And when you fix this, this changes. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So now the question is how. So I'm going to give you all just a couple of really simple examples, okay, of how you can change your thinking and what I see in people who have shit life syndrome and people who don't. So first is when people don't grow up with adverse childhood experiences or in high socioeconomic status, the first thing that's different is that people in shit life syndrome do not think that they can shape their future. So I want y'all to just think about this, okay? So if I have shit life syndrome, I grow up in an environment where my intentions do not shape my circumstances. Whether I want to play or I don't want to play, or I want to wake up on time, whether I want to do well on a school project or don't want to do well on a school project, I'm so neglected in my household that my desires become worthless. They have no bearing on the environment. So once our brain realizes that our desire has no differential impact on the environment, it decides, let's forget about desire. Compare that to what we see in the worst cases as entitlement in people who have high socioeconomic status, where the world says, hey, you don't get to jump to the front of the line, and their cognitive bias is so robust that they say everyone else needs to move out of the way. They believe that they are allowed to shape the environment, right? So this is a huge difference. And it leads to a huge difference in outcomes. And I'm not saying that like everyone with high SES is entitled. I think entitlement is bad. But there's this fundamental idea. So like I'd like to say that I had a healthy version of this at some point, was unhealthy, and I worked through that. So my parents grew up, or my dad grew up very poor. So like they had to take loans to pay their bills. They like could not afford sugar. It was like they were super poor. There were like 8 of them that lived in an 8x10 room. Half of them, not half, like 3 or 4 of them would sleep outside on like outside the house. Basically like you guys know like you have an apartment complex and outside you have like a staircase that people climb up to get to. So they used to sleep like on the stairs and the landings on the steps, right? So this was the environment that they grew up in. However, my dad worked really hard, had parents who really pushed him, got educated, became doctors, came to the United States. So they instilled in me a perspective that I can shape my future. And so then when I had setbacks in life, I had the benefit of growing up in a household where I was taught that if you try, you can succeed. You have the capacity. You don't have to take things laying down. If at first you don't succeed, it's a setback. It's not a failure. That is such a huge advantage. Now, this is not the circumstances that I grew up with. This is what is in my mind when I am faced with a problem. So it's not just the physical circumstances. It is, and the physical circumstances were good too, but it is the installation of how you see the world. And this is what is so devastating about shit life syndrome. What shit life syndrome teaches you is that what you do does not matter. This is the lesson that you learn. And once you learn this lesson, then your future is determined. The beautiful thing is that you can unlearn this lesson. And when you unlearn this lesson and you discover that you can shape your circumstances, then a lot of things will go well. Right? This is not your actual circumstances. This is the way that you respond to your circumstances. So I want you all to just think about 2 people when faced with some set of challenges. One person believes that if I'm challenged, there's nothing I can do about it. And the other person believes there is something I can do about it. I don't have to take it laying down. What impact do you think those 2 attitudes will have on these people's lives? So that's the first adaptation, is simply believing that you can affect your life or you can't. Can I shape my circumstances or can I not shape my circumstances? And I'm not saying that people are stupid for believing they can't shape their circumstances. Remember that if they believe this for a good reason. It is because they haven't shaped their circumstances. So this is the other thing about the human organism. The human organism learns from the past and it carries that forward into the future. Now, the problem is that sometimes the learning that we do is maladaptive. So I'll give you all a great example of this. So I don't know if y'all played Dark Souls 1. But in Dark Souls 1, there's this like cheat kind of thing that you can do. There's this dragon and you can shoot the dragon in the tail. And if you shoot it enough times, the tail falls off and you get this thing called the Dragon Tail Sword. Now, the Dragon Tail Sword is OP. You can one-shot a lot of enemies. So when I first played Dark Souls 1, I got the Dragon's Tail Sword because someone told me about it. And then I was one-shotting all the enemies, and then I gave up on the game because it became too hard. Because at some point, the Dragon Tail Sword stopped scaling, and you can't one-shot anything. And then the game became so hard, I was like, this game is fucking dumb. And I quit. So later, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, you know what? The Dragon Tail Sword is the biggest scam in the game. It is the biggest noob trap in the game. No wonder you gave up. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, if you get the Dragon Tail Sword, you never learn how to play the game. You don't need to roll. You don't need to parry. You don't need to like zone people out. You don't need to pay attention. It is such a crutch. So the way that I learned to play the game based on my circumstances set me up for failure in the future. We also see this in things like Elden Ring, right? I'm going to play some fucking arcane katana Rivers of Blood noob cheese build. And I'm going to cheese my way through everything, except if I ever run into a boss that has bleed resistance, then I'm in trouble. This is what shit life syndrome is. It is an adaptation to a cheese way of living life, which is not thriving, which is surviving. Now, if I ask you, okay, so if I play with the Dragon Tail Sword, does this mean that I can't beat Dark Souls? If I play some arcane cheese katana build, does this mean I can't beat Elden Ring? Of course not. But it requires you to adapt your general approach to the game. And this is exactly what shit life syndrome is like. And when I work with people with shit life syndrome, what we find is that there are 3 major adaptations that they need to make. These are the 3 most important adaptations. If you can make these adaptations, there's a good chance that your life will improve. So the first adaptation is something that first couple we've already talked about. So number 1 is, can you change your environment? Can you shape your life? As long as you believe you can't, that will result in this. These realizations are alone are enough to make me apathetic, procrastinate on all matters, and basically give up on life. This is the problem, right? So this is very deterministic thinking about the future. If you think your future is set in stone, which, by the way, is reasonable to believe given the fact that your future has been set in stone when you were learning to play the game of life. But this becomes deterministically problematic, okay? Because this means that you stop trying. And if you stop trying, then there's a very little chance that things will succeed. Second realization is jumping to conclusions. So there is a cognitive thing that I see a lot of people who have shit life syndrome. They jump to conclusions. They look at circumstances and they think that circumstances means this. Since I've been alone for my whole life, this means I will be alone forever. Since Dr. K is saying shit life syndrome is real, that means there's nothing I can do about it. What they really do is there's a very, very tight line between like one thing and another thing. They basically jump to conclusions. There isn't nuance or critical thinking. So if we look at this, right? So it's very unlikely that I'll ever be financially independent, and it's unlikely I'll ever find something interesting enough I deem worth pursuing. These realizations make me jump to a conclusion. So the way that I would, I've had patients like this before, and there are things that you can do to change this, right? So what I'd say is, oh, that's so interesting. So unlikely I'll ever find something interesting enough I deem worth pursuing. So then I would talk to this person, this is like what I've done, right? Is I'd ask them, what is the nature of interest? What determines how interested you are? Is there anything that you can do to change your level of interest in something? Is being interested in something a passive thing that is pre-generated, or do you have some kind of control? Furthermore, realizations are alone are enough to make me apathetic. Okay, so let's talk about being apathetic. If you are apathetic, does that mean that you cannot act? What is the relationship between feeling like acting and being able to act? So as you start to dig into a lot of these nuances, you start to see a lot of positive change. Because it's this stuff that is truly deterministic. We can't control what your circumstances are. If you get diagnosed with like stage 4 metastatic cancer, there's not much you can do. Right? There are absolutely things that are deterministic, and we'll talk about circumstances for sure. We're going to get into more detail about that. But my point is that the adaptations to survive will oftentimes keep you from thriving. And so you need to unlearn those adaptations. And one of the most important things that I want y'all to pay attention to is how quickly your mind jumps to a conclusion. I can bet y'all money, because I've seen this before, anytime I talk about super challenging things, what inevitably happens is someone will respond. Dr. K was saying this, and they will jump to some kind of conclusion. Are they saying I'm screwed? Or they're saying that he says it's possible, but I don't accept that. Dr. K doesn't understand this. Those are all valid criticisms. I'm not saying that those are invalid. My point is that y'all need to pay attention to how your mind jumps to a conclusion. So think about even how you are receiving what I am saying. Are you looking at it critically, or is some part of your mind jumping up and saying this is wrong? Or this may work for other people, but it won't work for me. Or this may work because these people have Dr. K as a psychiatrist and I don't have Dr. K as a psychiatrist. There are 1,000 different things that your mind will jump to so quickly. And look at where all of those thoughts go. All of those thoughts result in inaction. That's the problem. Look at where your mind goes. And what does it result in? Does it result in inaction? Does it result in apathy? Because this is a construct of the mind, right? This is what's really crazy. I'm not disputing that you guys think that way. You think that way for a reason. We have a ton of fucking evidence that shows us that this is really consistent. People do this all the time. Information processing changes. There are so many cognitive biases in depression. And furthermore, this is what's really crazy. So I don't know if you all remember this paper by good old Randy Auerbach, Sarah Richard and Sarah Kurtz, and Nicole Eberhardt. But this is a paper that is showing how, this is kind of wild, but basically, this is a paper that shows that when you have a low perceived control, when you don't believe you are in control of your life, that creates stressful situations. So our perception and results indicated that dependent interpersonal stress mediated the relationship between low perceived control and higher levels of social anxiety in girls. Conversely, boys who exhibited low perceived control experienced a greater occurrence of dependent interpersonal stressors. So this is really important to understand. When you believe you are out of control, this creates stressors. So what a lot of us think is that the reason that I feel out of control is because there are circumstances in my life that keep on happening to me that I can't create. My life is out of control because this is going wrong, this is going wrong, this is going wrong, this is going wrong. What this paper really shows us is that it is the perception of low perceived control that creates problems in your life. And I'll give you all an example if you're skeptical of that. So let's say that I have a family emergency and I have a big paper due in 1 week. And I need to email my professor to let them know. There's a voice in my head that says, hey, let your professor know that you have a family emergency and that you may not be able to get the paper in on time. But then what happens is I procrastinate. Or I think maybe I can get the paper done. Or maybe I think I don't feel good. It makes me feel ashamed to ask for an extension. I know I've been there. Hopefully y'all have been there, so this resonates with you. There is a right action to take in this situation, but you procrastinate in doing the right action. And then what happens is a week goes by, you haven't worked on the paper, and now it's the night before the paper is due. And now you begin to question yourself because you're like, now if I ask, like if I tell them, oh, there was a family emergency a week ago, but now I'm asking for an extension on the paper, the professor isn't going to believe me. They're going to think I'm making it up. I really should have done it a week ago. This anxiety creates a negative situation. If you had not been anxious in the first place, you would have sent the email. You'd have said, hey, I have a family emergency. I'm not quite sure if I'm going to be able to get to the paper. Just wanted to let you know. We all know that is the right answer. And if you look at your life, you're fucking procrastinating. You know what the right answer is. The problem is you can't do it. And it is not that your life is randomly out of control. It's because you fucking neglect it. You procrastinate. That creates your situations. We see this so much in our life. I'm not saying bad things don't happen to us. Absolutely, there's bad RNG. And now we get to really the crux of shit life syndrome, which is that in this life, there are things that are outside of your control and things that are inside of your control. And the beautiful thing about the homeostatic nature of life, this isn't just humans. This is like even amoeba. When amoeba detect the wrong chemical gradient, they will move in the opposite direction. They are responding to life. And the problem that we have in shit life syndrome is that we cannot respond appropriately to life. I need to send my professor an email asking for an extension. That is what the situation demands. There is a right answer here. What is it that gets in the way of me engaging the right answer? What do y'all think? This is what gets in the way. Interpretation bias. Attentional bias. Oh my God, my professor will think I'm pathetic. Oh my God, he'll dislike me. Oh my God, this hasn't worked in the past. I've asked for help in the past and it hasn't worked. There's a memory bias there, but it doesn't mean that it's all false. There's a bias, right? There's a kernel of truth, or especially if you've got shit life syndrome, a lot of truth. So another big thing that people with shit life syndrome learn, and think about how devastating this is to learn. Asking for help doesn't help. Two kinds of people in life. Those who ask for help and those who don't. And why does someone stop asking for help? Because they learn it's useless. All of the thoughts and beliefs that you have in your mind if you have shit life syndrome are warranted. They are justified. That does not make them right. This is a very important nuance to understand. You can have a lot of logic for believing what you believe, but the construct that you have in your brain does not dictate what happens in the future. This is the real tragedy. This is the tricky thing. So the first is even the belief of self-determination. The second is jumping to conclusions. The third is not asking for help. And even I struggle asking for help because I feel ashamed and I feel stupid. Like, it's so dumb. It's like dumb, right? And the fourth thing that we also talked about is the loss of future orientation. This one is very hard. So if you look at some people, like you look at some of these people and they're like living a life. And part of living their life is like a dimension of future. This is so simple that it's like, I don't even know if this makes sense. You look at some people and they're doing shit in order. You guys know what I mean? They're like, today I'm training for a marathon in August of 2025. And I look at these people, I'm like, what the fuck, man? I'm trying to get through the week. And they're like, yeah, I have a bucket list. I'm like, bruh, I'm trying to survive the day. I'm just waiting for the next Dota patch to drop. How do you have a bucket? Like, I don't have a bucket list. Someone recently asked me, and they were like, what have you done on your bucket list? And I'm like, I don't have a bucket list. And then I was like, kind of like, is this because I'm yogically detached from my life and I'm like content with my life? Or is it because like when I was a fucking degenerate gamer and I was just like fucking waking up every day and playing video games for 20 hours a day, I stopped thinking about the future? I think it's a little bit of both. The concept that I can accomplish goals in my life is foreign to me. This idea, and think about the hubris of having a bucket list. This idea that if you set these random ass goals that are so far away that you will one day achieve even a portion of them. Like, what the fuck? Do y'all get how that's their brain is working differently? It is thinking about the future dimension as something that can be realized. And literally half of the people that I work with, and I mean half, okay? I think this is a pretty good estimate because I work with losers and I work with winners. And the winners I work with have all these goals. And the losers that I work with don't have any. And it's like their mind operates in a different way. This too relates to trauma. So we know that once again, surviving in a prisoner of war camp, thinking about the future is a waste of time, so our brain unlearns thinking about the future. So when we have shit life syndrome, is it bad? Absolutely. Is the deck stacked against you? Absolutely. But there is hope. Because what is really holding you back is not the circumstances. That is what has held you back. That I completely agree. And this is a nuance that's important. But what holds you back, what's held you back for the last 5 years is different from what will hold you back from the next 5 years. And even remember, there's no future orientation. So even the capacity to realize that is impaired. That the future will be different from the past. When all you are trying to do is survive, every day is the same. And we see this so much. It's so sad in our community. I'm proud of this in a weird way because this is a place where I want y'all to come and feel this. It's okay to feel this. We don't want you to feel ashamed of feeling this way. But people come here and they're like, I'm existing. I'm not living. So that's what we want to help you with. And the really sad thing about this is not fair. Forget about fair. We can get caught up in fair as much as you want to. I don't know about fair. It makes me sad. But like, I don't think life is fair. Right? I haven't seen that. I mean, I decided on this, my first rotation as a third-year medical student. I was 1 week into third year, and I decided fairness is fucked. All you have to do is spend 1 week in the pediatric ICU, and you'll realize fairness is a waste of, I don't even know how this works. There's a 6-year-old kid with glioblastoma multiforme. Actually, not a 6-year-old. Patient with glioblastoma multiforme was a couple of years later. That happens closer between 25 and 45 years old. With the kid, it was like a blood cancer, leukemia or something. Right? You look at this and you're like, there's no fairness here. This is dumb. It's dumb. There's no fairness. Right? And I'm thinking about this patient with glioblastoma. Well, like, just great dude, had kids, was happily married, and it's like, boom, one day you got a terminal cancer, you've got 3 months to live. Like, that's how glioblastoma multiforme hits you. It's a rapidly progressive, very debilitating. Doesn't happen when you're old, happens when you're young, when you're in the prime of your life. There's no fairness here. But there doesn't need to be fairness. That's the crazy thing. Right? There's what you can control. And when you're looking for the world to fix your problems, like, I just have lost faith in the world. Like, I hate to say it. And now this is where y'all have to be careful, right? Because your negative bias, if you're depressed, will be, Dr. K has lost faith in the world, which means I should give up. No, I'm saying the exact opposite. I've lost faith in the world, but I've not lost faith in you. There's a huge difference. I don't count on the world to fix anything. That's why I'm here. Because I saw a generation of people whose lives were getting screwed. And I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to fix that. In fact, I went to people, so many smart people, so many compassionate people, so many dedicated people who were doing nothing about technology addiction. Who are doing nothing to address rising suicide rates, rising unemployment rates in young men. Who are doing nothing to address toxicity towards women online, stalking and dick pics. I have no faith in the world, but I have faith in you. Because this is all we can control. So if you see some problem in the world, there's once again 2 options, right? Either I can't do something about this or I can try. That's it. Those are your 2 options. And that's why I think shit life syndrome can get better, because I have worked with people to address these cognitive biases, and we have moved from there is nothing I can do about this to I can try. And the really sad thing is that even when circumstances improve, it doesn't always lead to better outcomes. So I see this a lot. It's really sad with my patients who have been, so if you look at women who have a history of abuse growing up, I imagine this is true of men, but I'm more familiar with the research on women. So if you look at women who are abused in the household, they're more likely to be abused in romantic relationships. I think something like 1 in 6 women will be sexually or raped, actually. So even sexual assault could be higher. Intimate partner violence, 30.7% of women with ADHD are likely to have intimate partner violence. This is a staggering number. And if you look at this, like, this is bad. And the problem, why does this happen? Why is it that if you were abused once, You are likely to be abused again. Is it because the world is rigged against you? No. This is the really crazy thing. It is because of the way that you engage in relationships. When you have a low self-esteem, see, when you have a high self-esteem and someone mistreats you, you leave the relationship. But when you are dependent, when your goal is survival, not thriving, then you are willing to tolerate abuse. It's a completely different way of looking at the world. What's the goal? And in shit life syndrome, the goal is survival, not thriving. That creates all kinds of problems. It keeps our life in this weird limbo zone of not actually ending, right? Like we're struggling along, we're kind of chugging along, but we're never getting anywhere. We're not quitting the race because, once again, I had a brilliant patient who taught me this, who tried to commit suicide 7 times. And I was like, do I need to be worried about you? And he's like, no. I was like, help me understand. Brilliant guy. And he said, well, the 7th time I realized that, like, some part of me does not want to die. I've been trying to kill myself. And something within me is fighting for life. So I'm going to stop fighting that thing. And that's all it took for him. No more suicidality. Right? So there's something within you, even if you feel like everything is like lost and whatever, there's something within you that strives. We look at this post and here I am fucking bashing this person, man, woman, I don't know. Right? And I'm saying, oh, look at this cognitive bias. But I want y'all to point out, pay attention to something. This person posted. This person is trying to change. This person is saying, my life is unsolvable. Nothing's ever going to end up anywhere. And they're not taking it laying down. This is a huge prognostic sign in the right direction. This is a win. The post may be full of negativity, but the fact that there is a post is a win. And this is our bias. Right? So now what I want y'all to do is, if you're listening to this, if you've been listening to this, did you consider that? And if the answer is no, why not? This is bias. So shit life syndrome is not deterministic. I do not believe that. Is the deck stacked against you? Absolutely. Can we count on the world to fix things? I don't know. Big question mark. The world isn't all bad, by the way. It's a lot of good in the world. Right? But what I have faith in is y'all. I have faith that if you understand the way that you function, if you understand what your biases are, if you understand the way that you view the world, determines some of the way that the world is. Then you can change. Your life can change. And I've seen it time and time and time and time and time again. Right? This isn't Dr. K being optimistic. My optimism is based off of skepticism, by the way. It's like, you know, it's like I saw bad shit and I saw bad shit and I saw bad shit and I saw people, and this is what's beautiful about being a psychiatrist. You see all these people are like, you know, my parents were even like, aren't you going to go crazy dealing with crazy people all the time? There's so much negativity, there's so much trauma. And it's like, no, actually, it's gratifying work. It's like you see triumphs of the human spirit. This isn't like winning first place in your karate competition. This is like, this person was addicted to heroin for 16 years. And now they're like happily married. They have a kid. They're sober. They have a job. They're like, it can happen. Like, you see this. And I remember asking my mom the same question. I was like, she's a pediatrician. And I was like, how do you not get depressed from like seeing all these kids get sick? And she's like, the nice thing about kids is that they get better. They're still growing. So if they have some devastating injury, like their brain is still in a formation phase. If they have brain damage, their brain is still quite plastic and their brain is literally growing. Something bad happens to an adult, like they don't fix the same way. Because there's a lot of hope. There really is. And I think this is like quite doable. Like, I don't think shit life syndrome is insurmountable. There are absolutely systemic problems, but there are personal factors too. And that's the thing to remember, right? So as a living organism, you are in a homeostatic relationship with your environment. Your environment is sending you certain signals, but you can shape your environment. I can change my furniture. I can change my appearance. I can change the way that I talk to people. I can change the way that I act. I can exert a lot of change on my environment. And the 4 things to keep in mind are, first of all, do you have any capacity of self-determination? Work on that. Second thing is ask for help, right? And your mind may tell you this is a waste of time. It's okay for it to tell you that. then the right response is that has been true in the past, but it may not be true in the future. If y'all are fans of stonks, you know that there is this phrase that past performance is not an indicator of future return. The past doesn't determine the future. You have some role to play. Be super careful about jumping to conclusions. The harder your conclusions are, the worse off you will be. And the last thing is try to regain your future orientation. Okay? So, I think there's a couple of things. Let's talk about this because I kind of skipped this earlier. I guess it's a good time, actually, now that I think about it. So we launched our trauma guide today, and if a lot of y'all are wondering, okay, but how do I do that? So the reason we build guides is anytime there is a long or detailed thing, like regain your future orientation, for example, like some of these weird abstract things that are like very difficult to, you're like, how do I do that? So we try to share some of that stuff with y'all today, but especially when we're talking about shift left syndrome, we're going to give y'all, we're going to dig into it more. But the challenge is that not everything can be like summed up in like with some answer in a 15-minute like end of the lecture. Here's what you do to fix it. Like it doesn't work like that. Like I'm sorry to say, right? So I can make like a video or make a stream about how to gain MMR. Hi. And then like, it's not like gaining MMR is like 15 minutes at the end of the lecture. So what we've done is in the trauma guide, we actually have, right? So this is really important, like overcoming paralysis of initiation and causes of paralysis of initiation. Let me see if I can't click it. GG, get wrecked to noob. Where is future orientation? So paralysis of initiation and overcoming paralysis of initiation are about some of these things like future orientation and like literally what happens in the mind and the brain, what the traumatic adaptation is, and hopefully some exercises to try to undo that. You want to say something?
It's locked because you have to go in order.
Okay, I have to go in order, GG. Okay. So this is our trauma guide. Just to give you all kind of a quick overview. So we've got, so like the way that we understand this is once you, remember we were talking about this homeostatic relationship with your environment where your environment shapes you. And in my experience with trauma, like primarily as a clinician, is that the challenge is that you get wired in a particular way that starts with your physiology and then can even result in things like there are certain somatic illnesses that correlate with trauma. Things like chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, like all these weird things that don't have like medical cures, like it's all trauma related. So how can you understand that stuff? There's some amount of physiologic rewiring, increasing emotional awareness, right? So when we went back to this concept of passion, like I don't feel passion, right? There's nothing that I can get myself passionate about. So then the question is why? So there's emotional awareness and emotional numbness, understanding your emotions, understanding paralysis of initiation, understanding things like procrastination, even understanding impulsivity. So a lot of the self-sabotage that we do is due to impulsivity. So that's just one track of the trauma guide. Then we have relationship track. This is one of my favorites. So there's stuff about like personality, what your sense of identity is. So there's other things here where if you look at this, you know, people have this idea of I am unsuccessful, I am screwed, I can't do anything, you know, like I've been thinking about seeing a psychiatrist, but I have my doubts. A psychiatrist won't be able to help me. There are a lot of I statements that we have to be super careful about. So how does trauma shape our identity and how can we reshape it? So we know that narrative is an effective tool to reshape your identity, even things like post-traumatic growth. So we know that trauma can have beneficial effects on people, but the question is how, so we dig into that. We've done a stream about post-traumatic growth as well, by the way. And then we talk about relationships, right? So, and the reason that it's organized like this is that your relationships, the relationship is something between you and someone else. So your relationship has to do with your identity. And the reason that we organize the guide like this is because if you want successful relationships, you need a healthy sense of identity. And so like it's kind of built on itself. And then healthy sense of identity, for example, comes from the integration of emotional experiences. So as long as you're numb, it's hard to form a healthy identity. Integration of emotional experiences involves some degree of calming down your nervous system. So everything kind of builds on itself. And then we even have some fun ones. Like, you know, I do a lot of this research. Sometimes, like, I find these really interesting papers, but I don't know how to turn it into a relation. Like, I don't know how to turn it into, like, a lecture. So, like, there's a lot of, like, research on sex and attachment style and relationships, right? And sometimes we'll, like, talk about, like, even I see some of this stuff in, like, the alpha red pill community. Or if you look at the science of relationships. Hi, Kruti.
Hi, guys. I'm just here to help answer any questions if you have technical issues.
So if we have, so it's interesting because if you look at sex is utilized in relationships in different ways. So if you have an anxious attachment style, sex is used to pull someone into the relationship, to intensify the connection in the relationship, right? So I feel disconnected to you. Let's have sex so that I can feel loved. If you have a secure attachment style, sex is an expression of the emotional connection. It is not a tool to enhance the emotional connection. I feel super connected with you, so let's have sex is an expression of that. Really interesting thing is if you have an avoidant attachment style, sex is used to keep emotions at bay. So sex is utilized to prevent the connection of emotion. So sex becomes something purely physical. There's no emotion. There's no love. We're actually sex has become the opposite of love. So these are like research studies that you know, I run across, but like there's no, I don't know like how to turn that into a lecture. So sometimes the stuff is floating around. And what I like about the trauma guide is it gives me like an excuse to talk about some of these really interesting concepts. So we'll talk about attachment theory. We've done lectures on it and things like that. But what I really like about it is you can't do that lecture without people understanding identity, relationships, and attachment theory. So it's fun to make guides because we get to like go into like more of the detailed, interesting stuff. And then I'm super hyped about this. So we also talk about karma. We're going to talk about that some today. This video, by the way, I think is like absolutely revolutionary. Changed the way that I view my life more than anything else. So we think about karma as a external thing. My actions have consequences. I reap what I sow. I'm now convinced that 99% of our karma is in our mind. The way that I allow my mind to think determines so much about my future. And that's kind of what we see with like these papers, right? That are the way we think heavily influences what happens in our life. But we don't control our thinking. In fact, what's going on is the opposite is happening. We are losing control of our thinking. The more that we're leaning into like apps and other kinds of like social media and stuff like that, other people are shaping our thinking more and more and more and more and more, right? There are people who are, and you can look at this in like political, we see this in political echo chambers. We see this in gender dynamics. Like other people are shaping the way that we see the world. We're not in control of our thoughts anymore. And once we lose control of our thoughts, we lose control of our actions, we lose control of our motivations, we lose control of our destiny. So a lot of karma is mental. We also, the other cool thing about guides is that we have a bunch of resources. So, you know, as part of like understanding like emotions and improving your emotional awareness, we've got tools like this. Growing stronger from trauma. So like, this is what's really interesting, but we have like narrative. We have a lot of stuff, a lot of research around identity, narrative, post-traumatic growth. And what we've tried to do is like go through a process to make this easy for y'all to access. So the cool thing about the guide is that we can do this kind of thing. This is hard to do like when we're streaming. Like it's like, okay, like let's take, I mean, I guess we could try this, but I imagine most people would leave if we're like, all right, class, we're going to work on our worksheets for 15 minutes. Right? I think that doesn't work. So some of this stuff is like really self-paced learning. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, and so here's something to understand about worksheets. So what we know about change is that change requires manipulation of information and spacing and repetition. So if you want to learn something, if you believe you are something and you want to be something else, even identity change still responds to the basic human learning circuitry. So what we want is manipulation of information. So you need to play around with it. If Dr. K tells you that you're a good person, that's not going to make you a good person. You need to challenge that. You need to play with that information, and then you need to repeat it. You need time for it to digest, and that's what worksheets really do. So like the whole point is you watch a video, and then like even that day or the next day, like you revisit that information with something like a worksheet that's been shown to enhance learning, enhance change, really let those concepts solidify, which is what we're trying to do here, right? Is like help y'all actually change instead of talking to y'all about changing. Okay.
Hey, so I wanted to congratulate Alok and the whole Healthy Gamer team on the trauma module. You've been working on it for like 2 years. So I'm really proud of you, and I'm really proud of our team on everything they've built. As you can see, there's so much more than just Alok sitting in front of a camera and filming this. There's so much work that goes on behind the scenes, from research to UI to designers, editors, producers, script writers, so much work. So it's about 2 years in the making. I really hope it helps. Alok has really kind of poured his heart and soul into this. So congrats.
Yeah, so speaking of, thank you.
You're welcome.
Right, so I know that's hypers and poggers, but it's weird, but I feel a slight amount of discomfort when we talk like that. Right, because it's like, it feels like, oh, like we shouldn't be celebrating all this hard work that we're doing. You'll know what I mean? Like it feels like, oh.
What?
Yeah, that's the thing. That's what we talk about, right? I'm just pointing out that it should be celebrated. I'm just sharing an instinctive reaction.
What? That you're uncomfortable?
Very mildly. We don't have to talk about it. It's fine. Let's move on.
Okay.
Yeah, I feel good about it.
Avoidant.
So it's I feel good about what it is, right? But even the praise component is like makes me mildly uncomfortable.
I'm not praising you.
I know.
You should praise your team.
My team is awesome. They're great. They're the ones that built that. Yeah, they did.
The mods went through all the videos.
I know. I saw that. So this is what's super cool is like when Kruti's saying that this is like a whole team effort. This isn't Dr. K. So, we had tons of people QA this stuff. Our mods QA'd everything. Everyone watched these videos. They built these worksheets. There's a lot of research that went into it. I don't know if you guys can tell, but this is. Hold on one second. So this too, like this was developed by our devs. Like this is super cool. Like you can see that this has like 3 meditation videos. This is 1 meditation video. It links to other things. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but now we're getting like this is like synergies. Okay. This is super cool. Like there's an arrow here. Wait, where does this arrow come from? This comes from here. Interesting. Emotional awareness. Physiologic rewiring reconnects to all the way down here, physiologic anxiety. So like, I don't know if y'all get this, but this is becoming orders of magnitude more complicated. Like the way that all of this stuff stitches together is crazy. And like, it's a work of design brilliance, which I didn't make. But it's a skill, yeah. So someone's saying skill tree. So like literally what we try to do with the guide is make a skill tree for life. It's like this is the skill tree for IRL. That's what it is. Right? We don't know exactly how effective it is, but that's what we're trying to do. And people may say, but that's not possible. No. Remember, just because it hasn't been done yet does not mean that it is not possible. Okay? Where's the parry skill? I don't see it. I will find you the parry skill. So this is the basics of parrying. Okay. Let me see what else is. Where is perception? Let me see if I can find y'all a. See? Getting overwhelmed. Parrying. 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 Also parrying. These are all parrying. And if you guys want to play a fun game, what we can do is y'all can y'all can ask me questions. And I will show you where that exists. So if we think about parrying in real life, what does it mean to parry in real life? A parry is an avoidance of damage, right? It's someone attacks you and you knock it back. So parrying in real life is a combination of 2 or 3 things. The first is being careful about your perception. So when someone calls me stupid, does that sink into me and become truth in here, or am I able to reject it? Just because you think I'm stupid does not mean I'm stupid. The second thing about parrying is once I let it in, I have an emotional reaction. So being able to identify and process my emotions is basically the equivalent of parrying. So I would say that parrying in the real world is a combination of perception and emotional management. That's what parrying is. So when someone's saying, I thought parrying was redirecting, that too. So here's a cool video from our trauma guide. Oh, interesting. Oh, God. Post-traumatic growth, right? This is when so this is like, post-traumatic growth is like not just the parry, but the riposte, or riposte. I don't know how to pronounce it, right? It's like the counterattack. So it's like, I'm going to parry and then I'm going to counter. Ha-ha! Ha-ha! That's what post-traumatic growth is. It's like you tried to damage me, but actually you're the one who got crit. Get wrecked, shitties. Like, that's what's cool. Like, it's crazy. Like, I'm really convincing myself now that, like, I think it's I think video games have everything that we need to know about life. I'm really starting to believe this. The analogies are getting, like, too realistic. Like, as video games are becoming more realistic, like, I'm beginning to see more and more of, like, these psychological principles. Everything can be reduced to a video game. Character builds, RNG spawn, Dunning-Kruger and MMR. I can't control my teammates. Oh, yeah, I have shitty teammates. Does that mean I'm going to stay at low rank? Oh, I have bad circumstances. Does that mean that I'm screwed in life? Careful. Careful now. Right? It's really weird. And, like, what I really think is interesting about this is, like, from a karmic perspective. So when I was, okay, now a story from India. So one time I was talking to one of my teachers about karma. And so I was in a class in an ashram. And so I was talking to a fellow student. And I was like, hey, what do you think about this karma stuff? And he was like, I can't get behind any doctrine that says that if someone was sexually assaulted, it's their fault. And I was like, damn, that is a really good argument against karma, because I don't think I can get behind that either. And especially as a clinician, like, it's weird, right? So, like, there's some arguments that you have something to do with being sexually assaulted, but I've seen people who really didn't ask for it or anything like that, right? It's absurd. So I was really skeptical of karma for a very long time for that reason. What was I saying? I lost my train of thought. That's a bleak way to end without something positive. Oh, yeah. So it was interesting, but I was talking to one of my teachers, and he sort of said, you know, like, bad stuff happens in life, but it's this person's belief, right? So he's not saying this is objectively correct, but he was saying that, you know, I believe that people are, it's not that bad stuff doesn't happen, but I believe that people are given the tools to manage the badness. That's the way that I view life. And so when I look at all this, like, everything going wrong in the world, right? Like, our brains are being programmed by social media. There's, like, climate change. There's people who don't believe in climate change. Like, fair enough. You know, I think it's okay to believe whatever you want. You know, we have, like, all these different things going on politically, and, like, there's inflation across the world, and, like, we have record levels of young men not entering the workforce. We have high levels of suicidality. Everything seems fucked. But we've got games. And I think that some of our answers to this like horribly terrible world, in the world that we live in, even things like COVID. So gamers were resilient to the increases in depression and anxiety for the first year of COVID because we were okay being online. We're like, okay, this is not that different. I'm resilient to these. This is like Darwin's finches. There's some kind of environmental pressure, and some of us are already built to survive. So I really do think we have what it takes to make this work. It's a view that I choose to adopt. I'm not saying that things aren't bad. They're bad. They're very bad. Things are very bad. But I think that we have unseen advantages. We have some trait that is viewed as a debuff, which in some circumstances can be incredibly OP. And that's what like Darwin's theory of evolution is, right? It's like this benign thing turns out to be adapted. This, by the way, is how we ended up with sickle cell disease. You all know this? There's something called sickle cell disease, which can be really terrifying, and people can't, their blood cells can't hold oxygen in the same way, and they sometimes need blood transfusions and things like that. And it's like, man, that sucks. Why would people be like this? Turns out that being heterozygous for the sickle cell trait makes you resistant to malaria, right? Which is why we see sickle cell disease more often in people who have genetic origins in Africa, because that's where there's a lot of malaria. So it's like we have a lot of these adaptations, which we don't realize what the value of them are. And I think really using video games is like almost like the Bible of the modern day. Like all the lessons we need to learn, if you can learn it in a video game, you can learn it, you can live it life. My favorite is that MMR is determined by my teammates, or rank is determined by my teammates. It's like, hold on a second. I don't know if your circumstances actually determine your life. Okay. All right. So, enough pontificating, chat. We've got other things to talk about. Okay. Now, let's address some even more challenging critiques. I've seen a post about shit life syndrome, immediately known I should let it all out, because shit life syndrome, as it seems, is just the most obvious side of the underlying contradictions within the world of mental health advice / care, both professional and community-based. If a person is feeling down because they need to care for 4 children while working on exhausting shifts just to make ends meet, the most bulletproof solution for their problems isn't to take a course of SSRIs and challenge their core beliefs with journaling. It's a goddamn living wage and paid leaves. That's it. Obviously, neither a therapist nor a support group can provide it. That's fair. What seems unfair, even cynical at times, is that instead of saying, that sucks, man, let's try to adapt to your objectively shitty situation, their answer is often something about changing a negative worldview. In some cases, it looks basically like gaslighting a client. It might seem like an extreme example, but take a look at the hottest topic over here. A lonely, short, balding, autistic man is objectively heavily disadvantaged on the dating scene. Recognizing this disadvantage and feeling bad about it is the only natural and I dare say healthy is only natural and I dare to say healthy. But what's the widespread answer again? It's all in your head. See that fat man in the grocery store with a wife? Just hit the gym and talk to girls, and if it doesn't work out, be content with yourself. Is it entirely wrong? No. Many men indeed find love while looking nothing like Brad Pitt, and you indeed can be happy when alone. Just like some people are happy in trailer parks, and some of them can win a lottery one day. It doesn't imply that living in a trailer park is dope and buying lottery tickets is a good financial strategy. I honestly feel the irony while saying this because I'm 3 months into the I honestly feel the irony while saying this because now I'm 3 months into the relationship with a nice and cute woman after years of being skeptical about it if I could ever get one. On paper, I should be a poster child of you can make it. Yet I understand that's a rather happy coincidence than a norm. All of it reminds me again about depressive realism. The phenomenon when people with diagnosed depressive disorders are statistically better at realistically predicting the outcomes than their healthy counterparts. I can't help wondering whether it is indeed depression speaking, or those people are just crushed by seeing the objective reality clearly. And the more that I think of it, the more I ask myself, is yet another post about how therapy or working on yourself will inevitably open a path to a wonderful, fulfilling future really helpful? Or is it rather deceiving? Don't get me wrong, therapy does help, support communities are a good thing, but are there limitations really spoken of? And it goes even further than just being honest about life being unfair. We speak about being true to yourself, treating yourself with compassion, ditching internalized expectations for authenticity, and being independent from craving external validation. Honestly, I feel much more compassion from myself when I'm lying down after eating a pizza than when I'm running on a treadmill after lifting weights. The main reason I do the latter is because I care about feeling masculine, which in the end boils down to societal expectations. Saying that I do that just for other people's validation would be an exaggeration, but so is saying that I do it entirely for myself. I know that because during COVID isolation, I felt fine looking at my slightly rounded belly. And I'm sure for 99% of people, it's pretty much the same. Okay. Another example is good-hearted platitudes about chasing your dreams instead of giving up. Cool, I could try to become a rock star in the age of Spotify, or I could pursue a woman I was madly in love with who would never reciprocate for a dozen reasons. Oh, I see, that's unrealistic. However, if I'd say that goals of successfully building a thriving business from scratch or becoming a woman magnet while being 5'6" are also of negligible probability for most, I'm suddenly being negative and interfering with people's dreams. So where's the line between accepting and giving up? Who's to judge? No coherent answers given. Life is unfair, pain is inevitable, definitions of normalcy are often fluid and arbitrary to an extent, and people are free to adjust their decisions when they feel like it. If we agree with that, do we really need to sugarcoat it? Could we spare ourselves some frustration if we were honest about expectation management? Accepting the limitations without falling for doomer mindset, being humble and realistic without forsaking life together, striving for contentment without expecting to be unbelievably happy. Is it possible to convey within mental health framework? I'm not sure that's necessarily therapeutic, but I can't ignore the feeling that's ultimately the right thing to do. So I love this post. Because, this is a great analysis. Okay? So, I love it because they're like, I recognize the irony of I was someone who was very skeptical of being in a relationship, and now I've been in one for 3 months. And they kind of say, hey, can we accept without giving up? Can we acknowledge that things are hard? Can we say that, we need to manage our expectations and you can't shoot for the stars? And I think, yeah. And then, what's this deal with depressive realism? I think it's fantastic. So the first thing that I want y'all to notice, this is nuance. It is not one way or the other way. Remember when we were talking about shit life syndrome and what it takes to move from shit life syndrome to putting together your life? We have to move away from jumping to conclusions. We have to move away from black and white thinking. We have to move away from a deterministic future. And that's exactly what we see happening with this person. Right? We don't know how long they've been in the community. Maybe they just showed up. But hey, I have a crazy thought. Maybe they just showed up and they got lucky. But maybe something that we're doing is working. Maybe, and I, by the way, completely agree with this person. There's a couple of things that I disagree with, but I think this is great. This is what you should do. Right? We can acknowledge that life is hard. We can acknowledge that we have some dreams that may be out of our reach, and we can still shoot for them. We can acknowledge that the reason that we go to the gym is to live up to a masculine ideal, but it doesn't have to be that way forever. So now what we're going to talk about is a couple things that this person talks about. So we're going to talk about depressive realism, and we're going to talk about how do you move from shit life syndrome when things are objectively bad to being successful and happy. There's a process. Okay? So let's start with depressive realism. This person says, all of it reminds me again and again about depressive realism, the phenomenon that when people with diagnosed depressive disorders are statistically better at realistically predicting the outcomes rather than their healthy counterparts. So we've talked about some types of cognitive biases in the negative form. So people with depression are less likely in some cases to judge the world accurately. But there's this concept of depressive realism, okay? Which is this idea that people who are depressed are better at judging the accuracy of events. So we also have studies that high intelligence, this implicates that high IQ as being a potential risk factor for affective disorders, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, and for increased incidence of disease related to immune regulation. That's fascinating, right? And if we look at depressive realism, so this is a study that's looking, this is a review, it's older, there's more recent articles on depressive realism. But there's this concept that if you look at human beings who are depressed, they are better at judging their real world chances. Okay? So this is what's really weird. So depressive realism. So if you are more intelligent, you are more likely to be depressed. And there are some studies that show that if you are depressed, you are more likely to accurately judge what is going on in the world around you. So there are a couple of weird things about this. So does that mean that if I am a doomer and I'm depressed and I see the world as negative, I'm objectively correct? So isn't that good to be objectively correct? So now we have to understand a couple of principles. So this is a great example of losing the forest for the trees. So if we look at human beings, do you think that we have adapted to be accurate judges of reality? So the crazy thing about the human organism is that the ideally functioning human organism is somewhat divorced from reality. We are not designed, we are not calibrated to be in touch with reality. We are actually calibrated to be out of touch with reality. We have all kinds of intrinsic, healthy biases that allow us to succeed in the world because we are not connected with reality. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. Give you all some examples. So first is people buy lottery tickets. Why? Because we all have this bias that we think bad things won't happen to us and we are better than average, right? There's like this better than average bias. This is not reality. This is a divorce from reality. We also know that human beings don't think probabilistically in terms of bad outcomes. So if I go to a restaurant and I eat there 9 times and I don't get food poisoning, if I go a 10th time and I get food poisoning, I won't go back to that restaurant. Even though the likelihood of food poisoning is only 10%, I'm divorced from reality and all of my reality will be shaped by this one negative event. This is not a bug, this is a feature. So the first thing to understand about depressive realism is that you may be more in tune with reality. That's true, but we start malfunctioning when we are in tune with reality, which is crazy to think about. So we also know that, for example, we have narcissistic defense mechanisms. And why do all human beings have narcissistic defense mechanisms? Because narcissistic defense mechanisms are an adaptive advantage. Instead of seeing the world as it is, we need some part of our brain to be able to be narcissistic, to see the world in a favorable light. So not seeing the world as it is also really important for procreation. Being able to ignore red flags is how we make babies. So this is really wild. And this even goes to the core of our neurological functions. So what a lot of people don't realize is that our eyes actually see, I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, see an inverted image of what we perceive. So our eyes are actually flipped upside down and like right to left and things like that. Our brain processes the actual input, even something as simple as our eyes, are actually like they're manufactured. We don't perceive reality. We do this weird thing in our brain where we flip things upside down. And you can even give someone inverted glasses, where if they wear glasses that flip the world upside down, if they wear those glasses for an extended period of time, our brain will adapt and will flip things right side up. And if you want to see something really interesting, we literally have blind spots. So you can do this. So hold your finger out in front of you. Put the second finger over here. Okay? Oh, hold on. How do I? close one eye. Yeah. Okay. So this is what you should do. Close the right eye. Have two fingers out in front of you and look with your left eye at both of the fingers. And then what we're going to do, we're going to move our left finger over here. Keep looking at this. Keep looking at this finger and move this finger. And what you'll see is right about here, you can, if you're looking over here, you can no longer see this finger. This finger will disappear. This one will disappear if you're looking at this one with this eye. You literally have a blind spot in your eyes. This is where your retina is. There are no photoreceptors there. Okay? We'll do this again. So hold your fingers out in front of you. Right finger, left finger. Close your right eye. Look at your right finger with your left eye. This eye is looking at this finger. And now we're going to move this over here until it disappears. There'll be a spot right around here. This finger will disappear as long as you're looking at this one. And it's fucking weird. So our brain generates, like an artificial intelligence, it generates an image of reality that is not real. This is not a bug. This is a feature. So the reason that depressive realism is bad is because removing our cognitive bias for the positive is actually maladaptive. So what we try to do is restore, with people who are depressed, we actually try to restore their disconnection from reality. This is wild, but that's true. So being tuned into the real world is not healthy for human beings. Now, there's another really important thing to understand. So depressive realism in some ways is real, but we also know that there are negative cognitive biases. So there are some things that we distort in the wrong direction. And basically, this is really important to understand about depressive realism. Okay? So studies examining subjects' recall of self-evaluative information indicate that non-depressed subjects are more accurate. So what does this mean? So depressive realism may make you better at judging the outside world, but it makes you bad at judging yourself. Your capacity for self-evaluation is even more distorted. So what this means is that when you look at a depressed individual, when they judge their capability in the world, it is actually even more distorted. So they're not realistic. This is where you have to look at the science, right? So we can have this depressed realism. Oh, people who are depressed perceive reality better than normal people, but it's not uniform. They misjudge some certain things and they judge other things more accurately. And their biggest misjudgment is of themselves. This is not accurate. So now when we see all these posts about, oh, I'm going to be alone forever, right? This is based on self-evaluation. So evaluation of the self in depression is more distorted. So if you're depressed or you have a very negative perception of yourself, there's a good chance that this is not an accurate perception. Good chance. We don't know deterministically, though. I mean, you could be right? These are studies that look at populations and stuff like that. Some depressed people may be accurate. And we know this. So a feature of one of the diagnostic features of a mood disorder that has depressive episodes is something called negative self-attitude. So the ability to evaluate yourself is impaired. So when this person is kind of saying like, okay, shit life syndrome is there. There's people who have objective disadvantages. What's the point in sugarcoating it? I don't think we're sugarcoating it. Or at least I'm not. I don't think. But what we're also not doing is like bitter coating it. Right? Because both happen. So I think the right way to look at your life is that there are some things that you're at a disadvantage of, and there are some things you can do about it. Now, the reason that we do a lot of this self-help advice, right, focus on yourself, why do we do that? There are two things to understand. The first is I kind of agree with this person. That's why I started HG instead of doing just clinical work all the time. So even the reason we developed a coaching program, including things like a creator coaching program and career coaching program, is I was here on the internet for a while trying to help y'all out. And what was the conclusion that I came to? I came to a conclusion that fixing your mind or going to therapy is not sufficient to improve your life or is not the most efficient way to improve your life. That people need help increasing their external outcomes. They need help improving their circumstances, right? They do need help getting jobs and things like that. And we had we had data from our creator program analyzed by an organization called Stream Hatchet, a third-party analysis of our data. And people who went through our creator coaching program had a 171% increase in follower and sub count over, I think, a 3-month period compared to average, without increasing the number of hours that they streamed. So we saw objective outcomes without an increase of effort via focusing on the self, right? So our coaches work with a creator. They help them understand themselves better, but the goal is to actually improve your external life. That's why we have coaching. It's not just about going to therapy and, we don't do that, and just healing your traumas. It's about how can I change this instrument to make positive outcomes in my life. That's why we went that road. That's why we did it, because I completely agree that the field of therapy, one of my biggest gripes with the field in general, this is thankfully changing. And a lot of good therapists out there aren't like this. But therapists have stopped taking responsibility for the outcomes of their patients in some dimensions. We'll take responsibility for clinical outcomes. But if someone comes in and says, can you help me find a boyfriend or girlfriend? Oftentimes therapists will not attach themselves to that outcome. We get scared. But good ones will. They'll say, if that's a goal of yours, we'll absolutely shoot for it. So I think that this is like a completely valid take. And I don't think it's sugarcoating it to acknowledge the reality of your situation. Now, here's the really important thing to understand. See, if your situation is objectively bad, this is what's really wild. The worse your situation is, the more internal work you need to do. Because a lot of people will say, but if my situation is bad, don't I need to fix the situation? That needs to happen. But internal work becomes more important. So if we look at outcomes in life, your outcomes in life are a combination of what you put in and what the world gives you. And the less that the world gives you, the more that you need to put in. This is why we emphasize personal growth. So in my experience, this was very simple. I applied to medical school for the first year, got rejected from 40 schools. Things were not good objectively. I had a 2.5 GPA, very hard to get into med school with a 2.5 GPA. I applied for a second year in a row, 40 more rejections. 2.5 is still a 2.5. Get wrecked, shitty. So the worse that my circumstances are, the more I need to focus on personal growth. What can I do better? What can I do better? What can I do better? I'm not going to deny these circumstances. I'm going to do everything that I can, everything that I can, everything that I can. And I remember the day that I got accepted to med school, my dad was in tears because he was afraid that I was fucked. And he was like, now that you have your foot in the door, nothing is going to stop you. He's like, you just needed one break. And now that you're on even footing, that momentum that I had to even get my foot in the door would have carried me to the top. And he knew that at that day. Unfortunately, passed away about less than a year later. 6 months later, passed away. But it was good. He gave me that message before he left this earth. Right? And I carried it with me. So the worse your life is, I think the harder you need to work. So if you're 5'6" and you're bald and you're neurodivergent, is the deck stacked against you? 100%, dude. That sucks. But it's not deterministic. And the more you need to work, because you need to compensate for your circumstances, because you have disadvantages. And what's really weird is this person talked about looking at the lottery. So this is cool. So what I did is looked at, okay, hold on a second. Because we actually have a lot of data that improving people's life circumstances does improve their mental health. So there's a beautiful study that was done by, I think, the New York Department of Public Health, maybe, or something. So they had this program in New York called Housing First. What used to happen is if you wanted to get public housing or subsidized housing from the state or city, you had to be sober. So if you're sober, that's a reward. You get a house. So New York realized that this is silly. And instead what they did is they started this program called Housing First. So they just gave everyone housing, whether you're an addict or not. And what they found is that when you give people housing, that reduces the rates of addiction. So once you have a stable place to live and you're not living on the fucking street, it's easier to avoid getting caught up in drugs. Then once you have a stable place to live, once you have an address, you can apply for jobs because they're like, what's your address? And you can't fill anything out. They can't, it's like you're screwed. You can open a bank account. You can get mail. Like there's a lot of data that shows that improving people's circumstances has exponential benefits on their mental health. That's what we try to do here, right? We're not at that scale. So what we try to do is like teach y'all stuff. Like we're going to do what we can with education and whatnot. We have this guide and stuff like that. We're going to teach y'all to meditate. But this person is not wrong that circumstances are really important. Now, the really interesting thing, though, is that circumstances plus... Hi, sweetie. Oh, my God. Hi, love. Okay. Great. Love you. Yes, you can have that back. Okay.
We're going to take her for lunch, okay?
Okay. Love you, darling.
How much longer?
A little bit.
Love you.
Bye. So... Where was I? So circumstances matter a lot. So I was curious. And so I was like, well, hold on a second. What happens to people who win the lottery? Okay? Like, what actually happens? And what I found was fascinating. Okay, this is like a new area of research for me, okay? So long-run effects of lottery wealth on psychological well-being. Okay, so... relative to match controls, large prize winners experience sustained increases in overall life satisfaction that persist for over a decade and show no evidence of dissipating over time. Turns out that winning the lottery, improves your life. Now, this is what's interesting. The estimated treatment effects on happiness and mental health are significantly smaller. So this is interesting. So overall life satisfaction will increase, but happiness and mental health won't necessarily increase. Okay? Now, so mental health declines immediately after winning a large lottery prize for individuals with low education and low levels of financial literacy. Okay? So evidence from commonly used SF-12 measures of mental health indicate that winners with low education experience increased role limitations due to emotional problems, are more anxious, and have less energy after they win. The impact on various measures of mental health is highly robust, statistically significant, economically significant, and persists for up to 2 years after the win. Unexpected windfalls have no impact on mental health of individuals with high education or high financial literacy. This is interesting. Now, here's the coolest study. Peers' income in financial distress. Evidence from lottery winners and neighboring bankruptcies. Okay. We find that the dollar magnitude of a lottery win of one neighbor increases subsequent borrowing and bankruptcies among other neighbors. We show that bankruptcy filers obtain more secured but not unsecured debt, and lenders provide additional credit to low-risk but not high-risk debtors. Okay? So this is crazy. So we're going to understand this. So a lot of people are like, all I need in my life is more money, and money would fix my problems. There is evidence of that. Okay? There's absolutely evidence of that. So we have these studies like Housing First, which are transformative. Okay? But then we also have some really interesting data. So I want y'all to think about this. So if I win the lottery and you are my next door neighbor, you are more likely to go into bankruptcy. And this, once again, is you're a low-risk person who takes on more debt than you can handle. This is secured debt, not unsecured debt. So it's not like banks are making a mistake and loaning it to you. This is crazy. This doesn't even, your neighbor winning the lottery doesn't affect your financial position at all. But you are more likely to become bankrupt if your neighbor wins the lottery. Now, we all understand that instinctively, right? Because now your neighbor is fucking balling. They're building a pool, they're doing this, and you're like, I want to do that too. So I want y'all to really think about this, because we're like, oh, just money. Like, if I was taller, things would be easier, right? There's some evidence of that. Absolutely. If I was more attractive, if I was richer, there's some evidence and there's some powerful evidence too, but it's not quite that simple. Throwing money at the problem does not necessarily make you more mentally healthy and does not necessarily make you happier. Overall life satisfaction in one study seems to improve, but in other studies, it doesn't. It's weird, right? So now what we see is that winning the lottery is also mitigated by your financial literacy. Like, that's crazy. It increases emotional problems if you're financially illiterate. And I've seen that. Well, we know that there's some like people who win the lottery and then they like end up broke. So what's my point here? My point here is that it's nuanced. My point here is that if we look at your neighbor winning the lottery, how does that result in you having an increased risk of bankruptcy? It's because of what goes on in here. What determines whether winning the lottery will lead to an increase in emotional distress or a lack of increase in emotional distress? What goes on in here? Now, we're not saying that this is 100% responsible, because we did see that one study that showed an increase in overall life satisfaction, right? We have the Housing First study, which showed that circumstances matter. But I think we grossly... Actually, that's probably not true. I was going to say we grossly overestimate. I don't think that's true. I take that statement back. Here's what I would say. There is absolutely an internal component. Because when my neighbor wins the lottery, this is the only thing that changes. And it increases my risk of bankruptcy. So why do we take this approach of, oh my God, we should just fix people's problems? And we should, I don't know how talking about your problems is helpful. Right? Like, why do we like sell all these stories of work on yourself and stuff like that? Because that shit matters, man. Because the circumstances, so this is what I want y'all to understand. Circumstances can be the same. But the way that you respond to those circumstances can be different. What is the difference between a failure and a setback? Do you get up the next day and try again? That's the difference. The circumstances are the same. It is your choice that determines. What is the difference between stubbornness and perseverance? So I remember after 2 years of applying to med school, my uncle took me aside. Awesome person. Love him very much. He loves me very much. Brilliant dude. Super, super awesome dude. He was like, hey, bro, maybe you should do something else. It's like, get a PhD or something. Like, this is not working for you. I was stubborn. I didn't listen to him. The only difference between stubborn and perseverance is when you're still failing, they call you stubborn. And when you win in the end, suddenly that stubbornness turns into perseverance. Oh, they're perseverant. Same quality. The way we see the quality is different. So there is no doubt in my mind that improving your external circumstances will improve your life. The tricky thing is that in order to improve your circumstances, there is a pile of evidence that suggests that improving your mindset correlates with that. We literally have studies from people like Carol Dweck, who is like, if you change the way that you think, it will change your performance. And the other crazy thing is that in this world, you cannot control your circumstances. You can control what's in here. That is why we emphasize that. The difference between me failing out of college and me being successful today, even if I would call it objectively successful, I feel the same. The difference is in here. This started to change. And even in this post that we see where this person is like so nuanced in their opinion and they're like, I work out and I do this and now I'm dating and I've viewed, like that's very nuanced, right? They're changing. You can see the change in their mind. They're not all one way. That's why we emphasize changing internally. If you're 5'6" and balding, you are at a disadvantage in life. That means you need to make up for it. Is that fair? Absolutely not. But if you want to achieve something in life, you need to work on this. Because you can't change the fact that you're 5'6". Maybe you can change the fact that you're balding. things you can do for that. Right? And even then, I've worked with people who are balding who are no longer bald. And for them, it's like, okay, if I'm balding, then I need this amount of money to get this kind of treatment, and then I need to do this, and then I need to do this. And they start banging that shit out. Whereas some people are like, I'm 5'6" and I'm balding, and like there's nothing I can do about that. I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life. That's the difference. The last thing that I want to talk to you all about so we're gonna hit it on the head. Can therapy help you if you have a shitty life? So let's say that your life is objectively pretty shitty right now and it's completely overwhelming you. You don't have a job, you have no money, you don't have a family, you don't have friends, you don't have an intimate relationship. The question for me is, how is therapy even supposed to help me in this case? I'm wondering because to me it feels pretty normal to be depressed, anxious as a consequence when your life circumstances are this bad. So to me it feels almost useless, utterly useless to go see a therapist when your anxiety and depression symptoms are mainly caused by your shitty life. And unless you decide to try to improve it, it's not going to get any better. Going to a therapist in this case could kind of feel like I'm trying to treat the consequences, anxiety and depression of a terrible life, no job, no friends, etc., instead of treating the root cause first. I don't know if I explained the problem I have with therapy well, but what do you guys think about this? Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant question. Where my iPad? I think, did she take it? What the hell happened? Okay, well, GG. Get wrecked, noob. Okay. So some people look at this and they're like, how can therapy help me? So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you all an example of, we're going to talk about what therapy does. And then I'm going to give you all an example of how therapy can help you if your life is objectively bad. Okay? So what do we do in therapy? We change the way that you perceive the world. We change the way that you react to your perceptions. And we focus on your thinking and your beliefs. We change the way that you think. We don't fix your circumstances. And so a lot of people will say, okay, but like my circumstances are causing my depression. So how does changing my thinking help me? Because this is not caused by, this is an appropriate reaction. So I'm going to read out a couple sentences to y'all. Okay? Or a couple of options. I got lucky versus my hard work paid off. There's nothing I can do versus maybe I can give it a shot. It's all my fault or it's all someone else's fault versus I have some blame to take here. I'm partially responsible for this and someone else is partially responsible for this. Chances are it won't work, therefore I don't want to waste my time. Or even if it doesn't work, I can give it a shot. These are not changes in your circumstances. These are changes in your attitude. These are changes in the way that you see the world. That's how your circumstances change. It starts with the way that you see the world. So I want y'all to think about I got lucky versus my hard work paid off. This is what we try to do in therapy. We try to change one into the other. Because which thought leads to what kind of action? I got lucky leads to no reinforcement of the action. Versus my hard work paid off, that thought incentivizes you to work hard tomorrow. There's nothing I can do incentivizes inaction. Maybe I can give it a shot incentivizes action. So a lot of people think that I don't understand how talking about my problems will help my situation. Whereas it turns out that talking about your problems can help a lot because it changes the way that you perceive and it changes the way that you react to the world. And if you can change those two things, it will change the way that you act. So when I work with people in therapy, they take chances, calculated ones. They don't let their negative emotions control them. So this is the other very simple thing that happens in therapy. I don't know if y'all have tried to solve a problem with a clear head or a cluttered head. It's hard to solve a problem with a cluttered head. And when we emotionally decompress, it clears your head. You are able to see things clearly and then act appropriately. Great example of that is procrastination. What is procrastination? You should do something, but you're not able to do it. Why? Because something in your head is stopping you. Remove that thing, and then you can act. The last thing to consider is if we look at this paper, right? So going to a therapist in this case would kind of feel like trying to treat the consequences of a terrible life instead of treating the root cause first. Whereas if we go back to Randy Auerbach's paper, boys who exhibited low perceived control experienced a greater occurrence of dependent interpersonal stressors. Right, so what is this paper saying? This paper is saying that if you are depressed or anxious, it will create negative circumstances in your life. There is no such thing as root cause. Root cause is a cognitive fiction that our brain loves. Our brain loves dividing things into black and white and first and second. That's not how it works. Remember that human beings are in homeostasis with their environment. My depression sends some signals to the outside world that the world responds to, and the outside world sends signals to me that shape my cognitive attitude. It's in harmony. It's a cycle. It's a circle. This is why what we see in therapy is that all boats rise together. Forget about therapy, medicine. So when someone's physical health gets better, their job gets better, and their mental health gets better. Everything rises together. So it's not first. It's not root cause. Even though what we really know is that both interventions are helpful. So supporting your circumstances and supporting your attitude, both are helpful. Now, the reason that we advocate for more about shaping your internal environment is because the tools that we have at our disposal are more geared towards your internal environment. I don't have $1 billion to... We try to do that, actually. So at the Healthy Gamer Foundation, we've given out second chance grants. This is just giving people who need some money. I think we've done that. I know it's been in process for a long time, and we had to get the right kind of oversight and stuff, so it took a while, but we've done that. So we believe in that work. It's also why we have things like career coaching. We're also trying to do things by shaping your environment, by doing things like advocacy. We go to different conferences. We have the Healthy Gamer Institute where we're trying to teach clinicians stuff about technology addiction. So we're working on all those things. You guys don't ever see that work, which is fine. But when I talk to you directly, what is the tool that I have? I have the tool of you changing yourself. There are a lot of people out there who are trying to do the other stuff, which is great. I think it's great. But what is the scope of our work? It is to change you. Because I personally think that once you start trying to change circumstances, first of all, I'm not an expert in that. And secondly, it gets muddy real quick. I know a lot of organizations that have really great intentions that try to make a positive impact in the world that it doesn't land in some ways. Pulling off programs like Housing First are exceedingly difficult. I actually think it's way easier to just change you instead of change your life. Because all we have to change is you. It's way easier to change the way that you perceive and receive love than it is to change someone else's love towards you. This is my belief. Now, the crazy thing is that I also think changing yourself is far more effective. I think that 90% of your destiny is formed by your thoughts and your actions. Now, I know that's a bold claim. I know that a lot of people will rebel against it. I will be the first to say that that is not objective. If you asked me as a scientist, not really a scientist, but from a scientific perspective, what do you think about that statement? I would say that that is incorrect. I would say that changing yourself maybe accounts for 50% at most. But we have a lot of data that shows that your genetics, your circumstances, we can determine where you were born, and we can predict your median income quite well. There's a lot of data that shows that the statement that I just made is false. And yet, I still believe it. Because I think there's shortcomings to studies. And hopefully with some of the nuances that we've shown you all today, you understand kind of what I'm talking about. Because just because a study says something doesn't make it true. If we look at the studies on depressive realism, they're more accurately judge the real world. Well, in some dimensions, yes. And in some dimensions, they're way worse at judging it. Depends on which side of depression bias you're looking at. In some ways, they're less biased. In some ways, they're more biased. And this comes down to mental karma. So I'm going to share this concept with you. If y'all don't believe me, fair enough, right? Because I recognize that that is one of the statements that I make that is less supported by evidence. Completely agree. And hopefully, I try really hard to separate out the two. This is just Dr. K's opinion versus this is something that is scientifically grounded in some really solid evidence. This is Dr. K's opinion. Big difference. But I believe it, right? And so my job is to share with y'all what I believe sometimes. Why do I believe this? Because I think the Western world has not understood karma, and especially mental karma. So the more I've understood this concept, and we have a video about it in the trauma guide, by the way. So we have this video on mental karma here. So I want y'all to think about your thoughts and how your thoughts shape your actions. And we're going to use the very simple example of playing a video game. If I play a video game today, what will happen in my thoughts? I'll be occupied for 1 hour. And then what will happen at the end of that hour when I'm done with playing one match, let's say? I queue up for a game. What will happen in my mind? I will have thoughts to continue. And so I play a second game. And then I have thoughts to continue. I play a third game. Finally, I start feeling hungry, so I stop. And I've taken one action to play a video game. I've created a whole set of thoughts. Now I look at the day and I realize, oh my God, it's the evening. I didn't do any work. So now I have thoughts of regret. Now I have thoughts of beating myself up and being frustrated with myself. Now, because I have thoughts of being frustrated with myself, what is my primary coping mechanism for negative emotions? It is to use technology or have a beer or something like that. So now I spend an hour on my phone looking at cat videos to absolve myself of the feeling of regret. I don't even realize I'm doing it. It happens so fast, subconsciously. The thoughts become autopilot. And then once I've eaten something and I watch something while I'm eating, now I've kind of cooled off and I'm going to play a game again. And then I'm going to go to bed too late, and then I'm going to wake up the next morning. I'm going to be groggy. I'm going to drink too much caffeine. And then I'm going to crash around 4 p.m. Now, since I'm fatigued and my frontal lobes aren't working and the caffeine is wearing off, I feel tired. I feel burnt out. I've been working all day. I've been catching up on some work, and because I'm smart and because I'm hardworking, like things are kind of okay. But now my frontal lobes are exhausted. So what do? I can't resist the impulse to play another game. So once the caffeine wears off and I can no longer work, I queue up and I play for 4 hours. Hour 3 rolls around. I'm feeling super hungry. I order some food. A pizza shows up later. I eat the pizza. I watch some shows until I pass out. Now the food is in my belly. It's highly processed. It induces inflammation. My gut bacteria get worse. I don't produce neurotransmitter precursors at quite the same rate because I'm eating trash. The next day I wake up, I have a mild level of inflammation. My friends and I used to call this feeling owned. This is old terminology now, boomer terminology. But we just say like, man, I just feel owned today. Like you just don't feel like doing shit. And so what do you do when you feel owned? You have this mild level of inflammation. Mild level of inflammation is correlated with an increase in depression and anxiety. Now I feel a little bit sadder. I don't feel motivated. I don't feel passionate. What do I do? Because my world is dull. Nothing's exciting. I don't want to read a book. I play games. Let me get that external stimulation. I've covered a 72-hour period. Where's the root of this? You look at this and you say, I play way too many games. I don't go to sleep on time. I eat like shit. The only time I can get work done is when I'm caffeinated. I'm burnt out at work. I have no passion. I don't feel like reading. I don't feel like doing any creative work. And by the way, there's no friends in here. I'm lonely. Where does this start? It starts with your mind. I choose to play one game. We do not realize how we are propagating our circumstances. You look at all of these things and you say, this is so hard to control. We don't recognize that the moment that you start playing a game, it suppresses your hunger receptors. It makes it hard for you to feel hungry. And then what happens is when you're done suppressing it, suddenly the hunger rises so much that it breaks through your suppression of awareness of hunger. And then you feel famished. You're at a caloric deficit, so you order 2,000 calories of food. Where does this start? It starts in here. This is mental karma. And I see the flip side of it too, where once you start controlling your thoughts, once you start sowing the right kind of mental karma, I want to eat this thing, I am not going to eat this thing. I'm not going to give in to an impulse in my mind. This person hasn't texted me back. Maybe I should message them and see why they haven't texted me back. And then I'll do it 16 more times over 40 minutes. Mental karma. We let our minds run wild. We do not cultivate gardens. We have these overgrown patches of whatever the fuck. And then society loves to colonize our mind. Oh my God. Let me explain to you how if you use this hair gel, you would be more attractive. If you use this Axe body spray, how women wouldn't be able to resist you. How if you played this video game, you would be happy. If you ordered this ab core destroyer roller core power ab workout thing, then you would be in the best shape of your life. If you wore this clothing, people would like you. If you had a thigh gap, you would be more attractive. See, what's happening right now is our minds are being colonized. They're being shaped to think in a particular way. Political propaganda is just the tip of the iceberg. Beauty standards, all this kind of stuff is happening, and we are not in control at all. We're letting them colonize. It's like an invasive species that is ripping through our mind. And then we wonder why we don't control our lives. It starts with mental karma. What is the action you take in the mind? And this is very simple to understand, incredibly difficult, but simple to understand. When I take an action in my mind, what happens in my life? When I queue up for one video game, what is the consequence? First consequence is I queue up for one, I don't play one. I play 6. See, our mind does not understand this. It doesn't understand the karmic consequences of our actions. So it lets you queue up for one. In fact, our mental karma is so bad that it tries to delude you. Because a part of your mind knows that one game is going to turn into 6, but your mind doesn't even let you realize that. It hides it from you. So everyone is saying, oh my God, this is me. You know, oh my God, so true, aware, this is how it is. So I want you all to think about this for a moment. All of you know this, but you let it happen. This is mental karma. Ignorance is not the problem here. It is action that is the problem. It is a lack of mental action that is the problem. So what does it mean? What does mental karma mean? So you guys can check out the video on the trauma guide for sure. But The main thing that I want y'all to really pay attention to is just notice your mind and which actions you take in your mind and what are the consequences in your mind. If I choose to have a beer today, what does that mean about my desire for beer tomorrow? Because here we are, we're saying I can't control my desires. I can't motivate myself. What are the things that lead to more motivation? What are the things that lead to less motivation? Comparison. Ho, great way to destroy your motivation is compare. I worked really hard at this. I'm proud. And then I look at someone else and theirs is nicer. Fuck. Comparison is of the mind. And we wonder why we're not motivated. So when I say I think 90% of your life is shapeable by you, this is what I'm referring to. I think it's because there's this huge dimension that we don't cultivate, that we don't act on. How do you get your mind to listen? It's not about getting it to listen. It is about sowing the right karma. What are the things that you can do so that the state of your mind is malleable? If I drink every day, it's hard to stop drinking. If I stop drinking, it's easy to not drink. Easier, let's say. Right? So the actions that you take set up the difficulties in your mind. Because when we look at this community, we see a lot of bad circumstances, absolutely. But we also see a lot of bad mental issues. And I don't mean illness. I mean procrastination, lack of motivation, no passion, no follow-through, no discipline. Where do these things exist? They exist in the mind. And my biggest problem, my mom was like, you need to be more disciplined. Wake up at 7 a.m. every day and you'll be more disciplined. I was like, in order to wake up at 7 a.m., I need to be more disciplined. That's the effect, not the cause. So where do you start? With mental karma. Just any action, whether it is having a soda or having water, the tiniest little thing. Notice that your mind wants to do something and try to figure out which karma you want to sow. Do I want to queue up right now, or can I clean for 15 minutes before I queue up? A revolution in your life is made from tiny little things. No snowflake believes it is responsible for the avalanche. And if you want an avalanche of change in your life, the snowflakes are thoughts. Such a tiny thing, such an insignificant thing. But cultivate enough of them and the whole thing is when you see an avalanche, you don't see snowflakes, right? You see something so big. And when you look at someone's life who's disciplined and successful, you don't see their mind. That's why it's so hard to duplicate. We try to duplicate their actions, not what goes on in their head. This person eats this, so I should eat this too. This person wears this, so I should wear this too. This person goes to the gym every day, so I should go to the gym every day. But you can't. The question is, what do they do in their mind? So understand this concept of mental karma. Understand that every day when you take an action in your mind, when you give in to a thought or you allow a thought or you move away from a thought, that will have consequences in your mind. You have a desire in your mind. Oh, let me see what my ex is doing on social media. Let me see if they're dating anyone new. Giving into that thought, fucked for 3 days. Such a tiny little thing, such a small snowflake, such a large avalanche. We give in all the time without realizing. This is mental karma. So here's what I want y'all to do. So I say 90%. Number's way too high. I'll be the first to admit that that is scientifically not realistic. But give it a shot. Give it a shot. Cultivate the right thoughts in your mind. This isn't the power of positivity. What I mean is be very, very direct. It's not think good things. It is take mental action. by resisting particular thoughts or leaning into particular things. Let me clean for 15 minutes instead of playing a game. Let me do 10 push-ups between cues. Let me drink a glass of water every 2 games, even if I don't feel like it. Forget about drinking a glass of water if I don't feel like it. Let me grab a water glass and set it next to my computer. You'll be amazed. Or tell me it doesn't work. Fair enough. That's how this works. So these posts that we responded to today, by the way, when we say that HG is more than me, this is what we're talking about. Right? There's a whole team here that works really hard. Y'all contribute. You chat. I respond to that chat. I say something. You say, Dr. K, this is right and this is wrong. This worked for me. This didn't work for me. And then we keep going. That's how we advance. This is how we climb the ranks of IRL. There are absolutely tools like the guide, but a lot of it is like, y'all are going to go experiment and report back. And by the way, we didn't cover this, but I guess we should. So like this is a problem that we tend to have, but I'm going to share this with y'all and then we'll meditate. So like this is how this works. So I'll leave y'all with this, okay? Discovering joy after a life of abuse. Quick post because I'm tired, but I'm finally feeling the payoff of all of my internal work.
How much longer are you streaming?
I'm just meditating now and we're done. Okay. Breaking up made me realize how much my trauma was affecting my life. I got in a very dark place after that, constantly watching Dr. K, Patrick Tian, and others to avoid doing something stupid. By the way, Patrick Tian's great. Strongly recommend y'all check out his content. Start to work on my inner child and self-hate from being abused as a child. This hate filled my life like poison for a long time. It was very hard to get out of bed and keep going. Currently, problems like my ex coming back and struggles made me realize I had bad self-image. I use MBTI as a guide. I know it's not scientific, and I realize I was an extrovert, ENFJ, not INTJ. Realized I'm probably not autistic, and this label was getting in the way of my self-development. Realized this loop. This is what we're going for. Unhealthy, I don't know what FE means. Unhealthy feelings, maybe. Mind thinks about other people and what they may think of you all the time. Burnout make you numb to your emotions and thoughts. First thing that goes when we start to burn out is empathy. You become emotionally distant. People notice this but blame lack of empathy. You numb yourself more because you are egocentric and they are right, and repeat. This is mental karma. This person has mapped it out. Start to get out of the loop and realize bad coping made me manipulate people by being a doormat. Start to communicate better and be around people that really respect me and don't feed on my distorted self-perception. Mental karma, mental karma, mental karma. Listen more than I talk. Whoo-hoo. And try to solve other people's problems instead of being stuck in my head. But put a healthy distance between what other people think, feel, and what I feel. I'm tired all the time, but I am constantly filled with a sense of joy. When I become aware of my shadow aspects and start integrating and transmuting instead of denying and projecting. My dark side, my higher self, my karmic relationships, the ego, old patterns, and my spirit guides. So it can be done, chat. Can it be done by you? I don't know. The question is, how can we find out? All right, so we're going to leave you all with a meditation from the guide. Okay? So, oh, here we go. We're now going to go into a very simple meditation practice that helps us relieve emotional energy. So the first thing to understand is that emotions are not simply mental. We sort of think about emotions. Starting over, chat. We're now going to go into a very simple meditation practice that helps us relieve emotional energy. So the first thing to understand is that emotions are not simply mental. We sort of think about emotions as something that happens in the mind, but emotions absolutely have a physiological component. All emotions affect our nervous system as well as our physiology.
So we know that some emotions are associated with the sympathetic nervous system. Things like anger or anxiety will increase our respiratory rate and our heart rate. We also know that even when it comes to diagnosing an anxiety disorder, muscle tension is one of the diagnostic criteria. So emotions exist within our body. So today we're going to share with you a technique, very simple technique, to utilize your body to relieve emotional energy. Anytime you're feeling some kind of emotion, there will be some kind of physical correlate. So for example, with anxiety, we frequently experience things like muscle tension, especially in the area of the neck and the shoulders. And even emotions like sadness can feel like a constriction in our throat. And there are even subtle variations. So while we may think of something like shame or feeling worthless is the same, there's a subtle difference in terms of the physical pattern of these two emotions. So in this practice, all we're going to do is notice where there is a physical sensation within our body. And many times, especially if we are alexithymic or colorblind to our internal emotional state, we may not even be aware that we are feeling an emotion. And yet you will be able to detect some kind of physical sensation. And the cool thing about emotions is that if we are mentally feeling some way, it will trigger a physical reaction. But the converse is also true. If we do something to the body, we can actually relieve emotional energy. This is one of the theories that was developed into something called the emotional freedom technique, or EFT. We address that a little bit more in the treatment section, but that's just one example of a therapy that was developed with this principle. For the purpose of today, what we're going to do is, first of all, notice what we feel in our body. Secondly, we will breathe into that physical manifestation. And as we breathe into it, we will notice that that physical manifestation relaxes. As the physical manifestation of the emotion relaxes, the mental emotion will also calm down. I'm going to walk you through the sequence of the practice, and then we'll try to do it together. So the first step of this practice is very, very simple. Just notice what you feel within your body. As you close your eyes and pay attention, your body will suddenly give you all kinds of signals. It'll tell you, hey, there's a little bit of tension over here, or there's an itch over here.
Okay, I'm gonna
and
be
especially
distracting,
if
so I'm
we're
gonna
feeling
step out.
emotion, we'll feel some kind of dominant sensation. So spend a few moments focusing on whatever sensation you experience, whatever floats to the surface. And then what we're going to do is take a deep breath. And as you breathe in, imagine that the breath is traveling to that part of your body. Follow the breath into the part of your body that feels tight, constricted, or uncomfortable. And what you'll naturally notice is as you breathe into it, that space will expand and relax a little bit. And now what we're going to do is breathe out. So as we breathe out, there will be an even further relaxation. So instead of returning to our original tightness, that part of your body will relax. So all we need to do is focus on a particular part of our body where we experience an emotion and breathe in and out of that region. So we'll breathe into the particular part of our body for 3 breaths, 5 breaths, 7 breaths, maybe even 9. The more powerful the emotion, the more breaths you may need to take. We don't want to breathe particularly rapidly. In fact, we want it to go slow. And while we are doing the breathing, we want to pay attention to our physical sensation. So let's assume that I have tightness in the chest. So as I breathe in, I'm going to pay attention to that tightness. Over the course of our breaths, we will feel the tightness naturally relax. And as the tightness in our body relaxes, we will notice a mirroring relaxation within the mind. So now let's go through this emotional breathing technique together. So if you're feeling a particular emotion right now, or you're feeling something in your body, we'll pick that as our focus. Otherwise, we'll use the chest as a simple example, just for the sake of explaining the practice. So I want you to focus on your physical body, a prominent sensation, and if you don't feel anything in particular, you can focus on the center of the chest. Close your eyes, sit up as straight as possible. We want our back to be straight, our neck to be straight, our head to be straight. And now we will slowly breathe into the chest. And as you slowly breathe in, you'll feel the chest naturally expand. And then we will exhale. And then the chest slowly relaxes. And now take a second breath. And exhale. And now at your own pace, slowly breathe into and out of the chest. And as you focus on that particular part of your body, when you breathe in, put all of your attention on the physical change of inhalation. And then all of your attention on the physical change of exhalation. With each outgoing breath, let your body relax. Let your body deflate with each exhalation. Aside from your spine, which should remain erect through the whole practice, everything else is relaxing. Nice, slow, deep breaths. And as you get into breath number 6, number 7, really try to slow down the exhalation and let that relaxation happen very, very gradually. Continue breathing at your own pace. You'll notice a natural slowing of your respiratory rate. Totally fine. And now pause for a second and pay attention to how you feel now. You may notice that the physical sensation has resolved or reduced, and you'll also notice a natural slowing of the mind. Now, when you're ready, you can come back. If we've been practicing for a few minutes, you may notice even a change in your sensory perception, that the space around you seems a little bit different from a color or a lighting perspective, and that just means that you did the practice right. The main thing to remember about this practice, especially when we're dealing with situations of overwhelming emotion or things like a triggered trauma, is that these emotions will dominate our thoughts. They shape what we think about. They make us feel like we're panicked. They make us feel out of control. And our body doesn't really know what to do with all of this energy. So normally, in cases of trauma, we will turn to other kinds of things to manage these emotions. We will experience some sort of reflective numbness where our brain is trying to suppress these emotional signals, or we'll turn to other kinds of coping mechanisms to push the emotions away. Oftentimes, those behaviors that we engage in actually create more problems for us down the road. If I'm procrastinating on studying for a test because I need to do really well on it, that procrastination causes me even more panic the next day. So you can employ this practice anytime you're experiencing some sort of negative emotion. You don't have to practice for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. You can do 5 breaths, 7 breaths, 9
This
breaths.
is important, chat.
You can practice for 5 or 7 minutes if you want to, whatever feels right to you. In the case of people who don't subjectively experience emotion, you can even do this practice if you feel a physical sensation. So sometimes if we're alexithymic, which means that we don't know internally what emotion we're experiencing, we're colorblind to our internal emotional state, you can still notice physical sensations. And if you notice some kind of physical discomfort, you can use this practice to resolve that discomfort and calm down the emotion.
Wow. Okay, chat. All right, so thank y'all for coming today. That's a video from the Trauma Guide, which is out now. It's been a couple years in the making, ton of research, full team effort. I really hope it helps y'all. Man, it was so carefully crafted. There's a lot, that goes into it, a lot that gets cut from it, a lot that we try to figure out, okay, so if we actually want to help people, what is the sequence of things that y'all can build on? And that's really what it is. It's like a skill tree for real life. And so the trauma guide is really about the dimension of how events shape you, the science of adaptation, and also how to rewire yourself. So it's made with a lot of love. Thank y'all very much for coming today. Happy Monday and good luck, chat.